Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Saturday, December 22nd, 2 p.m. Sean Kilpatrick loaded up the trophy buck, securing it to the back of the four-wheeler. Wiping a light sheen of sweat from his forehead, he chuckled at the unpredictable Arkansas weather. 1 minute it was below freezing, and the next warm enough for shorts. Taking off his gloves, he finished tightening the rope. Thrilled his fingers were no longer frozen. A smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Emmett Jeffries would be so jealous when they rolled up to camp. The 12-point catch was Sean's last tag for the season. Jeffries had yet to shoot one. "What's so funny?" Jared Starkson asked. "Just thinking about how irritated Emmett will be. I won our bet. He hates losing." Jared's laughter reverberated through the quiet woods, only to be drowned out by several planes screaming overhead. Both men looked up, watching the strange spectacle. Sean silently counted 20. Wonder what's going on. Jared shrugged his shoulders. "Looks like they came from the Jacksonville Air Force Base and are heading toward Dallas. Awful close to Christmas for practice maneuvers." "You have no sense of direction. That's south." Sean pointed the direction of the planes. "Dallas is west of here." "That's why some nerd invented GPS." Jared deadpanned. "You know, Jeffries ain't gonna pay up. The man's tighter than a virgin's asshole." "True, but it ain't about the money anyway. At least not for me. I enjoy pissing him off." "Yeah, I get that. You ain't changed none all these years. You're worse than an old woman holding on to a grudge for something that happened ages ago." Sean snorted. "You'd be singing a different tune had Emmett porked your prom date. And in your own car." "Probably. The difference between the two of us is I wouldn't still hang out with the loser after, what, over 20 years? Oh, and I wouldn't be a cop either because I'd have a felony arrest record for assault after beating the fucker to a pulp." "Yeah, you would," Sean chortled. "I, however, enjoy tormenting him every chance I get. Mental scars last much longer than physical ones." Jared shook his head while climbing onto his four-wheeler. The age-old, my dick is bigger than your dick game. Gotcha. Since we're on the subject of tormenting others, will you please explain to me why you haven't kicked Craig out of the hunting club yet? I mean, we're risking a lot by having him here. What if he slipped and brought some shit here? We would lose our jobs. You really suck as a friend sometimes." Sean frowned. "Craig lost his way after the sudden death of his wife. Would you still be as harsh with your criticism if he opted to hit the bottle like you tend to do, rather than snorting coke? Doesn't matter because that ain't what happened. Booze is legal to buy. Coke ain't. We're cops and he's a lawyer. We all know better. End of story. Craig's been clean for 6 months. Stop worrying. He needs the support of his friends, not condemnation." "Will you use that same argument with the chief? If so, I guarantee you it won't work. You gotta let that thin skin of yours toughen up and stop being so nice to others who can fuck up your world in a flash. That's why after we get back to camp, I'm heading home. Already got enough meat for the rest of the year. I don't want to tempt the fates any longer. Craig's a liability." "Your choice, not mine." Sean settled on his own machine after taking a picture of the buck. He clicked over to Facebook to upload it, but nothing happened. The little blue ball in the corner continued to turn. Damn woods, no cell service. You and social media, you're almost as obsessed with it as you are with Marion. Oh, and speaking of her, what's going on with you two? Rumor round town is your unit's been seen at her office several times during the last week. Please tell me that's not true. I can't take any more of your bitching about her shenanigans." Sean grimaced at the mention of his estranged wife. "Gee, and I thought to be able to vent is what friends are for. Guess I was wrong. As I mentioned, your friendship skills are sorely lacking." "Give me a break. I've endured way above my quota of listening to you dissect your relationship. You married fools are the reason I've stayed single. After she cheated on you and got knocked up by another man, you said the marriage was over. What's changed now? Did she learn how to give a better blowjob or agree to a three-way?" "Watch it, Starkson." A flame of anger ignited in Sean's gut. "That's my wife you're talking about. We're working things out. We have no choice." "There are always choices, Sean." Jared raised an inquisitive brow. "What? Oh, shit. Please tell me it ain't yours." The anger from seconds ago dimmed as Sean recalled the last discussion he had with Marion and her gynecologist. He hadn't told a soul about the results of the DNA test since he found out 2 days prior. "Yeah, it's mine." "Oh, shit." Jared's dark brown eyes widened from shock. "That does change things. If it were me, I'd already skedaddled out of town." "Believe me, I was so shocked, a kitten could have knocked me over." Sean let out a huff of air. "I've convinced myself it wasn't mine. Still sort of numb about the whole thing. Can't believe I'm gonna be a dad." "Wow, me either. You're a better man than me. Even if it was my bun in the oven, not sure I'd want to turn on the stove someone else cooked at." Despite the intense subject matter, Sean laughed. His best friend since second grade had a sick sense of humor. "That's why you're the whore dog and I'm the loyal retriever. So when does this little bundle of joy arrive?" "Due date is January 26th. Oh, and in case you're interested, we're having a girl." Jared let out a low whistle. "Let's hope she takes after the loyal retriever side of the tree, not the—" "Enough, Jared. Again, that's my wife and child you're talking about." Gunfire broke the silence of the woods. The sounds of weapons discharging were common during deer season and wasn't the reason they both froze. What transformed the two friends from carefree hunters to concerned cops was the volume of shots fired and the terror-filled screams of grown men. Exchanging glances with Jared, Sean saw the worry he felt on the inside beaming across his friend's face. They fired up the four-wheelers, flying through the woods back toward camp. Sean topped the hill and stopped, turning off his four-wheeler. Jared did the same. "Let's go in on foot." They both reached for their rifles and dismounted, creeping through the dense underbrush toward the encampment. Sean and Jared had spent every hunting season in the same woods for over 20 years and knew the area well. The eerie silence made goosebumps stand erect on Sean's neck. No chirping birds or squirrels, not even the usual din of insects. As they picked their way closer, he strained his ears for any sound. The gunshots had ceased, as well as the screaming. The stillness was more terrifying than the noise. Upon reaching the edge of the camp, their original concerns morphed into fear. The camping chairs surrounding the fire pit were overturned, food and utensils left where they had been dropped. Impressions in the dirt indicated a lot of activity. "What the hell?" Sean muttered. Jared crept over, hand hovering over the ashes. "Cold. Been out for a while." Stepping over to the front porch, drawn to the disemboweled torso of the 12-point buck Craig Jackson shot earlier, Sean grimaced. The thing had been ripped to pieces and strewn from end to end of the long porch. Nothing was left except skin, antlers, and bone. Glancing up, he searched the area and counted all the vehicles. 16, just like when they left, yet none of their hunting buddies were around. A cell phone lay face up on the ground, the edges coated in blood. Peering closer, he noticed the last number dialed was 911. The front door to the 8-room cabin they all shared was wide open. Several sets of bloody footprints led inside. The bay window had been shot out. Shattered glass glistened in the afternoon sun. All their four-wheelers are still here too, Jared whispered from Sean's right. Something gold and shiny caught his eye. Then another, and another. The empty shell casings left a trail from the front porch into the interior. Snapping his fingers, Sean pointed. Jared's face blanched at the vast amount of spent ammunition and blood splatter. Both men went into cop mode, sweeping the cabin, keeping their steps tight and quiet as they followed the trail of bullets and blood. When they reached the back door in the kitchen, they were greeted by bloody handprints on the floor, walls, and doorknob. The back door was ajar. Strange chomping sounds filtered from the back porch. Sean recognized the noise first and mouthed, "Bear?" Jared looked at the amount of blood pooled on the floor and shrugged his shoulders. Holding up his fist, the signal to remain still, Sean took a long step backward and peered out the small kitchen window to get a better view. Fearing his fellow hunters had been victims of a four-legged predator, he needed to see exactly what they were dealing with, and how many. Black bears were abundant in the area, and maybe a family of them had stumbled upon. Time froze the minute his brain registered the incoming signals from his eyes. A wave of dizziness slammed into him so hard he saw double for several seconds. "Craig, what are you doing?" Unable to contain his thoughts, Sean muttered, "No way." Jared took one step forward toward Sean's position. He whispered, "What is it?" It was the last words Officer Jared Starkson, the 43-year-old best friend of Sean Allen Kilpatrick, would ever say. The second the sentence left Jared's mouth, Craig Jackson leapt into the kitchen, landing on top of Jared. Both men fell to the ground. Jared's gun clattered to the floor. In shock, Sean hesitated for a split second before firing. The bullet ripped through Craig's shoulder, but didn't stop him. Jared's screams gurgled to a stop after Craig opened his bloody mouth, latching onto Jared's windpipe. He tore it out with one bite. Jets of red arterial blood shot from the wound, coating Sean, the walls, and the floor. Taking a deep breath, Sean took aim and fired again, this time hitting Craig's thigh. Blood and flesh burst from the wound, but Craig never gave any indication he felt a thing. Jared was no longer fighting to survive. His body convulsed from the enormous loss of blood. Sean knew only seconds remained before he died, so he chambered another round, blowing Craig's head off. The bullet exited Craig's skull and entered his best friend's, killing both instantly. Oh, Jesus, what in the hell?" Sean muttered while staring at the bloody mess in front of him. He couldn't grasp the fact he just killed two of his friends with one shot. The question was answered by the appearance of Frank Wilson's mangled body. Unable to walk since both sets of thigh muscles were gone, Frank pulled himself into the kitchen by grabbing onto the edge of the door. Sean's stomach juices burned up the back of his throat while gaping at the thick smear of intestines and blood left in Frank's wake. Frozen in horror and shock, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Frank's eyes were solid black. Strange wiggly blue lines reminded him of a road map covered the face and exposed arms. His wits returned after Frank opened his mouth, letting out a spine-chilling growl. On autopilot, Sean raised his rifle and fired. The bullet pierced Frank's skull just above the bridge of his nose. With one last gurgle, Frank's head slammed into the wood floor with a loud thump. Noise outside caught Sean's attention. Stepping over the corpses on the kitchen floor, rifle steady, he looked out the open door. His mouth went limp. A sea of blood and flesh littered the backyard. 14 bodies in various states of dismemberment were strewn across the dead, dried leaves. The ground gleamed crimson underneath the mid-afternoon sun's rays. The only way he could tell they were his friends and hunting buddies was from their torn clothing. Upon realizing two half-eaten bodies still moved, he was hit with another bout of dizziness. Stepping back into the main part of the cabin, forcing his fingers to quit shaking, he extracted his cell. He prayed the sporadic cellular service worked. It didn't. He was greeted by a robotic droning voice. "We're sorry. All circuits are busy. Please try your call again later." "That's for landlines, not cell towers," Sean roared into the mouthpiece. With no choice left but to leave and get help, or at least get closer to a functioning cell tower, he pulled the keys from his pocket. Adrenaline pumped throughout his muscles. He burst out the front door, across the yard, into his truck. Nerves on edge and mind spinning, he fumbled to get the door open. Once inside the cab, he set his rifle in the seat next to him and tried to stick the keys into the ignition. They slipped from his fingers, clattering on the floorboard. "Damn it!" Bending down to retrieve them, the weird grunting sound he heard Craig mumble earlier hit him. It came from the right. Snatching the keys from the floor, he shoved them into place, and the engine roared to life. The growing sense of dread didn't stop him from glancing out the passenger window. Holy fuck! The once familiar face of Martin Lawson stared back at him through the glass, his eyes the same as the others. The ebony nothingness was like staring into the pit of hell. Martin's white cheekbones and the upper part of his teeth, where the soft flesh had been ripped off, sparkled in the sun. The sickening sight was like a magnet, pulling all of Sean's attention to the gore. The pull broke when Martin's bloodied hands slammed against the window with enough force the glass cracked. "Enough of this shit. I'm out of here." Slamming the truck into reverse, he tromped the gas. In seconds, he was on the narrow dirt road leading him away from the carnage at Deer Camp. He never let up on the gas and made the 3-mile bumpy journey to Highway 270 in record time. The gravity of the unbelievable situation left tears sliding down his cheeks. Inside the quiet cab, he offered up silent prayers for the dead. About 4 miles, he tried the phone again and got the same results. Willie's pit stop was less than a half-mile away. He could use their phone. Pushing the Ford F-150 hard, zooming down the empty 2-lane highway at over 90, he tried to remain calm, which was impossible. Jerking the wheel, he pulled into the parking lot and slammed on the brakes. He left his truck running, jumped out, and ran inside. "Malvern Police official business. Need to use your phone," Sean yelled, looking around the quiet store for an employee. Silence greeted him while making his way to the counter. "Hello?" Gut instincts, honed from years of being on the force, kicked him right square in the gut. Slowing the pace, he inched toward the counter, eyes scanning the dimly lit interior. Less than 3 feet away from the cash register, he smelled it. The thick odor of copper and the stink of bowels made him hold his breath. Death. The floorboards creaked underneath his weight. Stepping carefully, he peeked behind the counter. His ragged breath caught in his throat. There wasn't much left of Willie. The old man's snow-white hair looked as though it had been dipped in a can of red paint. The cavity holding his internal organs was nothing more than strips of flesh and rib bones. Clutched in his right hand was a Ruger, a spent shell casing resting near his head, a gaping hole on the other side. "God, I hope you blew your brains out before—" Backing up, Sean moved over to the cash register where an ancient black rotary phone sat. It had been in the same place since he was a boy. Willie Hopkins was too cheap to purchase a new one. Sean hadn't seen anyone use the old thing in years and hoped it still worked. Picking up the dirty receiver, he winced. No dial tone. A grumble rose from the back room Willie used as the office. After what Sean experienced in the cabin down in Poyen, he didn't feel the need to see what made the noise. He had bet everything he owned he already knew. Racing back to the idling truck, he floored the accelerator and headed toward Malvern. Dead, leafless trees zoomed by in a blur as the speedometer neared 100. When he passed the road sign noting Malvern was only 5 miles, he tried his cell again. Dead air. What in the hell is going on? 1,000 thoughts raced through Sean's mind at almost the same pace as the speeding truck. In minutes, he crossed the city limits, hitting the brakes when he came upon a blockade of military vehicles obstructing the entrance to downtown. What in the world? Sean slowed for a better look. A large group of people covered in blood and gore ambled toward the county jail, some in uniform, some not. His touch with reality snapped. Stomping on the gas pedal, he zigzagged around the vehicles, yelling gibberish the entire time, forgetting all about Jared, Craig, Frank, Willie, and the others while dodging the dead. All he could think of was getting to Marion and their unborn daughter. By the time he made it to town, he realized things were much worse than he imagined back at camp. Hundreds of dead bodies and abandoned vehicles littered the streets. While dodging them, he realized the rifle in the seat next to him wasn't near enough protection from whatever was going on. Spotting an empty Humvee up ahead, he pulled up next to the driver's window. Making sure no one, or thing, was close enough to hurt him, he rolled the window down and peered inside. The front seat was covered in dried blood and brain matter. A female in fatigues lay motionless in the passenger seat, half her head in the driver's side, frozen fingers still wrapped around the grip of her weapon. Scanning the rest of the vehicle, he felt a spark of hope. 3 fully loaded M4 carbines rested on the middle console, and the keys were in the ignition. Glancing around once more, he made sure he was still alone. Satisfied he had enough time to check, he crawled partially through the opening and turned the key. The Humvee rumbled to life and had a half tank of gas. Slinking back into the cab of his truck, he snatched the hunting rifle and backed up about 4 feet. After rolling up the window, he shut the engine down, locked the door, and ran to the passenger's side of his new ride. "Sorry about this," Sean mumbled to the dead soldier. Wincing at the smell and sight, he gritted his teeth and pulled. Unwilling to just leave her in the middle of the street, he dragged the stiff body to the edge of the curb. A grumble to his right made the hairs over his body stand on end. He knew what it was and felt no desire to look. Running back to the Humvee, he climbed behind the wheel, executed a U-turn, and headed toward Marion's. He made it less than 200 feet before the quiet afternoon filled with the faint sound of the EMS siren. He slowed down and felt around for the assault rifles, overcome with the need to have them close and ready. His hand touched an unfamiliar shape. Sean slowed to a crawl, craning his neck to see what it was. A rocket launcher? Why in the world did they... Oh shit, they planned on... Sean broke out into a sweat when the sound of automatic weapons drowned out the noise of the siren. More planes streaked across the sky. In the clear afternoon sun, he saw the last thing his eyes would ever take in. Bombs falling from the sky. Some weird instinct made him throw his hands over his head as the first bombs hit nearby, making the entire Humvee shudder. Oh shit. I'm sorry, Marion. I tried. I really did.
Halt! Seize him. Throttle his throat. Bind him hand and foot. The burlap about him. And to the car. The steel-like commands followed each other in well-timed succession. The voice of the leader was purposely muffled, and each word was clear-cut, sharply and quickly spoken. With measured step from out the quietude of the partially illuminated, seemingly deserted street, 6 men had emerged. They offered not a comment, neither did they tarry. Each man knew his particular part of the program, and all acted quickly and with precision. In the twinkling of an eye, the aged Clegg Panzer, gagged, bound, and heavily wrapped in a covering that smelled of harness leather, was lifted from his feet. The leader signaled the others to follow. They pushed through the willowy brush and behind the large signboards that hid them from the street. Across the vacant lot they went to the darkness of the alley. "The plank, and strap 'em." The leader's words were more stern, more frigid than before. Panzer was stood upright, and 2 men held him thus, while 3 others placed a plank at his back. 3 surcingles were slipped about him, one at his feet, one about his waist, and one about his shoulders. All were tightly drawn. "They'll make a fine specimen of a mummy when we're done with him," jeered one in an undertone. The leader sprang quickly forward and, touching the speaker lightly on the arm, spoke in low, cautious tones. "This, I deem, is no place for jest. The guardians of the city's peace may soon be upon us. Leave your tormenting until we are in the distant spot, secure from the jurisdiction of courts and the eyes of men." The leader swung quite around and gestured toward the waiting truck. "Slide the burlap body in and let it lie flat on the vehicle's metal bed." A murmured word, and the helpless pantser was tipped backward and lifted and slipped within the waiting car. Two men mounted to the driver's seat. One sat on either of the flaring sides and two climbed in at the rear. The motor spun. There was a grinding of the meshing gears, and soon they were out upon the city's thoroughfare. With darkened lamps, the car crept on to the unpaved streets of the sleeping suburbs. A quick turn that threw the bound body to one side, and the motor belched aloud. Now they were safe. The lights flared out into the murkiness of an unlighted night. Down went the lever on the quadrant, and the car lunged forward furiously. On and on they went, over rough and smooth, uphill and down, a black humming demon in the stillness of a damp, pitch-black night. There was a whispered word. The motor was slowed down, and at a divergence of the road, the car leapt to the left. For miles they bumped along a narrow, timber-flanked byway. Again the engine ceased to labor. The brakes creaked and squealed. The car stopped suddenly. "We've arrived," came a voice from the driver's seat. 3 distinct taps on the floor of the car. "All out," rasped 6 voices in unison. 12 human feet hit the leaf-strewn ground at the same instant. All went to the rear of the car. 6 black-robed men faced toward the bound one. It was the leader's frigid monotone that rent the moment's silence. "Unbuckle the straps that hold him to the plank. Remove the burlap, untie his feet, but give him not the freeness of his hands." 5 men took their places quickly, each man to his particular task. Panzer was dragged out and stood upright. The men worked fast, and soon he was blinking in the dazzling glare of a powerful electric bulb. 6 men with coal-black beards of equal length formed in a semicircle in front of him, each dressed in black, a tight cap of the same color pulled far down over his ears. Panzer glanced from one to the other. His lips were for a moment paralyzed. Again he momentarily gazed at each of the 6 men in turn. His small blue eyes glistened under the gray canopy of his hair. His emaciated face quivered. His purple lips parted, and he breathed long and deeply. "The Black Temple Band," he gasped aloud. "You're right, for once, you old image-maker," sneered one. "You super mystic," hissed another with a fiendish smile. "I am not the maker of the lifelike skeleton figures," pleaded Panzer. "Lavilli is the creator." "Ha ha!" sneered the leader. "'Tis none but Panzer's hand that shapes the images of our dead, and makes them mechanically perfect, that this degraded Lavilli may use them for his designing purposes. A disgrace." A sardonic hiss went round the semicircle. Panzer's deep, sunken blue eyes snapped, his wan face grew tense, and the straight-cut, livid lips parted. "Then you, that you do accuse me, must be the husband of the leather dealer's wife," he asserted firmly. "'Twas your burlap that—" A heavy hand clapped quickly over the speaker's mouth, and a deep voice sounded. "No more of this. You know one of our number, we admit. By studying deeper, your acknowledgement and the rapid succession of thoughts you pursued to arrive at this recognition prove to us that you are unquestionably the one whom we did this night seek." "Silence!" commanded the leader. "Speak no longer thus in so densely timbered a place." He turned to the gray-haired man. "Guide us to Lavelli's palace cave." Why is it that you cannot go alone, since you have come this far unguided?" "Parley not with questioning," retorted the leader gruffly. "We cannot find our way in this entangled labyrinth. We know there are secret wirings here, and do not care to meet our fate at the hands of such an unscrupulous wretch as you." Then, in firmer tones, "Lead on, and say no more." Panzer was thoughtful for some moments, his aged head bowed low. "Do you refuse?" demanded the leader, directing the blinding glare of the light on the old man's face. "Not I," declared Panzer, with quickened turn of mind. "Unbind my hands that I may be free to use my arms." His blue eyes met the leader's black ones squarely. "Do this, and place in my care the electric bulb. I will show the way. Once started, you shall see all, be the end what it will." "Shall we witness your transformation?" jeered one. "No more such remarks," admonished the leader. "Take the bindings from his arms." Soon the huge light was in Panzer's trembling hand, and he turned down the narrow trail that penetrated the timbered valley. "Wait here," he said. "I will clear the way. When I call, come at once." Panzer proceeded a little way on the rough, rock-strewn path. He stepped to a bush and pulled at the twig. Instantly the forest darkness was glittering with countless sparkling bulbs. A few paces more, and he reached into a pile of rocks. There was a shaking of the stone pathway, similar to the movements of a grain cleaner's screen. Suddenly the rough pathway became as smooth and even a surface as a slab of polished marble. "Come!" cried Panzer. 6 black-robed men dashed forward quickly and were soon at the aged Panzer's side. The passage was lighter than the brightest day. The gray-haired man bowed in reflection, then, looking up, dashed a portable lamp upon the stone. "What have you sought?" said he in a languished monotone. "You soon shall see." As slowly as a funeral march, Panzer led them down the path of polished stone. Numerous lights glared brightly through the thick foliage of the overhanging branches, and giant trees, thickly set in entangling underbrush on either side, walled them in. The aged one reeled weakly from side to side as he went, faltering on, while behind him trailed the 6 black-robed men, all with bowed heads. Panzer stopped suddenly and faced about. "We're here," he stated in a solemn, quivering voice. The eyes of 6 black-caped men followed his directing finger. Before them was a perpendicular wall of stone, smoothly polished and apparently without joint or crevice. "But where is the entrance?" asked the leader, somewhat puzzled. "'Tis here, right here before your eyes," declared the aged one in a cold, lifeless tone. "Open quickly. We have no time to tarry," commanded the leader hastily. "Be it so," agreed Panzer, reluctantly. "I thought you might turn back." As his voice died out, he raised his slim white hands heavenward and pulled at a twig above his head. A vapor encircled him, and the rustling of the leaves ceased, and an infinite stillness crept over the spot. Then moans, as of unseen, suffering humans, broke upon their ears. The white-haired man, for a second time, raised his hands and touched a broken branch. Slowly, steadily, the weird sounds died away. "Remove your robes, black princes of the Black Temple Band." He paused a moment to give them ample time. The 6 men did not move. "Obey my command," he said, with a raise of voice. "Delay not. No man can enter this place dressed in black. 'Tis Louville's steadfast rule." "Rules are not for us," chimed 6 men in unison. Panzer laughed a sickening laugh. "You do not understand the seriousness of your tone," said he. "My life, as it is now, is worthless to me. An aged man in 6 murderers' hands. One touch, and through your 6 bodies, as well as the one I now enjoy, countless volts of electric current shall quickly pass. I give you time to reconsider. Shall I end it all? 6 black robes fell instantly to the earth at the wearer's feet. The gray-haired man gazed intently toward the perpendicular wall of stone. He pushed a knot on a gnarled tree. Inch by inch, mechanically, quietly, the wall began to open at the top and tip gradually outward. Soon, a faint ray of light showed around the edges. Once started, the moving wall kept swinging down, as if hinged at the bottom. Purple-white lights now gleamed into the black-bearded faces of 6 statue-like men. As the stone wall continued downward, seeking slowly the level of the smooth entrance, the gray vapor became denser. Gradually the men were separated from the outside world by the myriads of glistening, dancing crystals. When the wall rested horizontally at their feet, a mammoth eve lay open to their view. The purple light cast a ghastly glow over the spacious interior. A huge copper railing enclosed a massive table in which were hundreds of black buttons. Midway across the cave, from right to left, hung heavy drapes of gold and silver cloth. From the stone dome was suspended a giant hand-carved globe of countless facets, which divided the gleam of the powerful arc light into thread-like rays of violet and green and yellow hues. The once lowering wall now formed an entrance slab, mirroring the brilliancy of the richly carved cave. Panzer stepped forward and, pausing in the entrance, faced the eager band. "Do you wish to see more?" he asked. "Or will you leave me and return to the place from which you came?" "We'll see all, and see your finish, too," declared the leader dryly. Panzer smiled a death-like smile. "Then be it so. Enter, black princes of the Black Temple Band. Walk steadily in single file, and touch not a single thing, for all within these walls are currently bearing devices of Lavilli's master hand." 6 men bowed acknowledgment of the aged one's command. Panzer turned mechanically and faced within. With timed cat-like tread he entered. One by one, the 6 black-caped men fell into line and followed to the portals. With a wave of his bony arm, the aged Panzer motioned them to form in single line about the outside of the polished copper railing. Quickly he stepped to the large polished table with its numerous buttons. He touched one of the black beads upon its surface. The massive entrance closed with the same mechanical precision as it had opened. "Enough of this!" cried one. "Where are the figures? They are what we want to see. Whom are you imitating now?" Again the aged man laughed coldly. "Be quick," commanded the leader, taking a step forward, but avoiding the rail in front of him. The long, tapering fingers of the aged man touched another button, another, and still another. One by one, little by little, the gold and silver drapes folded back, exposing the remainder of the cave. Neatly arranged in a semicircle about a moss-covered, stagnant pool were wan, ivory-complexioned, human-like heads set upon thinly robed waxen forms. Glistening, half-closed eyes peered down upon the murky waters in a stony, death-like stare. Again the withered fingers passed over the responding buttons. Steadily, languidly, simultaneously, a slim right arm of each of the mechanical figures raised. Panzer chuckled weakly, and his fingers pressed quickly upon others of the black buttons. The mechanical lips of the waxen heads parted. Beating time, the draped arms moved up and down. Panzer's small blue eyes turned warily to each of the 6 men in turn. All, save the leaders, caught his glance. He dashed around the circumference of the cave toward a waxen figure still incomplete. The white-haired man's fingers touched other buttons quickly, and figures ceased to move. His conciliatory smile was gone. His nervous face twitched in agony. He lunged forward, and in an instant was in pursuit of the leader. The leader reached the partly finished image, with Panzer close behind. He jerked aside a sheet. In the semi-darkened section before him lay the likeness of an incomplete human form, a counterpart in the clay. "Wretch!" the leader cried. "You shall this night die! Come, men! Dash him into the green pool, and hold his head submerged until he shall breathe no more." Panzer attempted to return to the table that he might extinguish the light, but 6 men held him fast and moved him toward the pool. Suddenly the leader drew back from the rest. "Hold, men," he said thoughtfully. "Let Panzer witness the wrecking of his fortune." "Do not ruin my life's work," cried the white-haired man in despair. "Please grant that I may exhibit it to an art-admiring world. Let me show that Lavilli's teaching has made of me a supermaster at the trade. Numerous patents are now pending. This wealth will I divide. Grant me my time that—" "Patents? Bah! Life! 3 times bah!" hissed the leader. "One hold the guilty wretch. Others to the waxen form, spare not one." Quickly, 5 men dashed forward toward the silent likeness of life, leaving the white-haired man within the 6th one's sturdy grip. A shriek of pain echoed throughout the cave, and 5 men halted in their steps. The leader had touched one of the forms lightly and had received a tingling sting. Mumbled words passed among the 5 men. The leader's eyes focused fiendishly upon the trembling, helpless Panzer. "Turn off the current," he commanded loudly. "To do so, I must be free to return to the table," was Panzer's quick reply. "You may," said the leader, "but we will accompany you. Touch also the button that opens the heavy door." Hurriedly they seized him and carefully avoided the encircled, polished copper railing. They rushed him to the button-covered slab. Quietly the heavy door swung down. His fingers moved slowly, as if in agony. Momentarily his hands rested on the buttons, his head raised, and the pallid lips parted. "'Tis done," he gasped, his tear-filled eyes raising to meet the black eyes of the leader of the gang. "Save the images," he pleaded. "Save the images, for they are masterpieces of a master art. Lavilli has gone to barter them for a fortune, and still I hesitate to transfer ownership. For 50 years I toiled unceasingly upon them. Save them, I beg, even though I shall not live to see the light of day. Consider, men, should you, in a fit of hate, destroy the work it has taken a lifetime to perfect." Each bearded man stepped back, and each again studied the figures near the pool. Whispers went from ear to ear. The leader moved apart from the rest and addressed the aged Panzer. "We grant you the request you make." His voice was low. Each word was slowly, carefully enunciated. "Your images shall be spared, for we shall load them in the truck. They shall be sold. 'Twill pay us for our trip." "Me?" interrupted Panzer with bowed head. "You have seen, for a last time, the summer's rising sun," declared the leader frigidly. Turning to the men, the leader waved them round the railing. "Go about your work and parley not," he ordered. "We will reap the reward of this miser's clandestine life." One by one the images were carried through the opening and down the narrow stony path, and carefully placed in the car. Tears coursed down the withered cheeks of the watchful, white-haired man as the last one passed from view. The leader seized him by the arm and started toward the pool. Panther drew back. The leader called to his men, and instantly they were at his side. Picking up the aged man, they carried him and stood him near the water's edge. "Tear his garments into shreds," commanded the leader gruffly. "Tie them around his worthless frame so that neither hands nor feet can move. This done, we shall hold him below the surface of this greenish pool." His voice sank to a deep, acrimonious bass. "And let him die." Between parted lips, the aged panther clenched his pearly teeth and struggled in their grasp. Pushing backward and then forward, he moved the men close to the shiny copper rail. Suddenly he dropped upon his hands and knees and crawled. They pounced upon him, but their fingers slipped their hold. Try as they would, his shoulders passed under the railing inch by inch. "Rip the garments," ordered the leader hoarsely. "We'll bind him when he stops." Under the polished copper railing, the struggling panther crept. To stop him, two men unthinkingly braced against the current-carrying rail. A painful groan. Panther moved on untouched. 6 pairs of eyes rolled painfully heavenward, and 6 men dropped, a quivering, lifeless mass. When the morning sun crept up the cloudless eastern sky, the weary panther, with a wan, solemn yet purposeful face, slowly guided the laden car down the city's quiet thoroughfare. The door to the well-hidden cave had been securely closed, never to swing again. The electric wirings had been stripped from the forest-furnished hangings, and, what was dearer to the aged panther than life itself, his works had been saved to keep him company.
Edward Harker waited in his office until the financial management firm of Harker, Parks and Associates was empty, and then took the elevator to the parking garage beneath the Manhattan skyscraper. He found his Lincoln Navigator and started it up for the first time in 3 months, and drove north on the Henry Hudson Parkway. He crossed the George Washington Bridge at night and plunged into the industrial wasteland of Newark, with its endless lighted spires over the electrical grid substation. He drove through the night, down I-95, then crossed into the peninsula of Maryland, pitch black with farmland. He listened to the radio. It spoke at intervals of a storm brewing in the Caribbean, slowly plodding and spinning its way north. Florida had issued an evacuation notice for its eastern shore. The Carolinas were preparing to issue similar warnings. It was all very dramatic, and the roads were empty. At about 3 a.m, Harker crossed the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel. It stretched a long line of electric light across the blackness of the bay at night. He couldn't see the water, just the black expanse that stretched on forever. A harsh November wind pushed against his SUV. He felt the great, dark ocean heave in the night. He reached Corolla on the outer banks of North Carolina by early morning, as a light rain fell from an expanse of low, gray clouds, pushed northward ahead of the hurricane. The bridges to the island crossed the chop of green ocean. His was the only vehicle on the road. The wiper blades beat a soft rhythm, and he was tired now, all his regrets beaten back by lack of sleep. His 4-story, 8-bedroom beach house, normally rented out during the summer for $3,000 a week, had been empty for nearly a month. He stood on the deck of the 3rd floor in the cold rain and watched the surf of the incoming tide break far out on the sandy shelf before rolling white and gray onto the beach. The dunes were as large as mausoleums, and the wind picked up the sand and sent it stinging through the air. It was a northeasterly wind, and it shook the broom sedgegrass and dune elder, caused the waves to chop and the fish to cease feeding. At the edge of the horizon, the ocean seemed a vast and bloated belly. Harker left the deck windows open, took off his shoes, and fell asleep in his clothes in the master bedroom. Harker woke in the late afternoon. His cell phone had vibrated with so many incoming calls the battery had died during his sleep. There was a mist covering the island, which grew so thick it seemed the sea had mixed with the air. He took off his socks and rolled his pant legs to the base of his knees. He walked barefoot over the splintered wooden bridge that led beyond the dunes to the beach. It was cold, and the wet air sent a chill to his bones. The sand, which had overtaken and swallowed the bridge at its end, was thick and damp. He stood on the beach looking out at the breaking waves. The surf left saltwater foam on the sand that shook like beached jellyfish, then kicked loose and rolled like tumbleweeds. The currents heaved up detritus from the sea floor, and the hard-packed wet sand was littered with refuse, ancient waterlogged wood, bottles, broken shells, seaweed. The currents were so wicked he could see them. Rivers of water pooled through the surf as waves broke against each other, and were sucked back out by riptides. He walked nearer the sea, and the cold water ran up the beach and over his feet to his ankles. He could feel it, the power of it, the great storm generating kilotons of destructive force 1,000 miles away had somehow reached out and touched him. His white silk shirt was almost completely unbuttoned, and it rippled in the wind. Sand stung his face. He looked north up the misty, darkening beach, but could see no one. He turned south, and as far as he could see, it was empty. He walked north up the beach slowly, feet in the cold water, hands in his pockets, head down to protect his eyes from the sandpaper wind. He walked slowly. His mind turned, but he didn't think conscious thoughts. Indeed, he felt his mind to be blank, succumbed to the inevitable maelstrom. The cold water swept his feet. He walked until he could no longer see the bridge to his house through the rainy mist, and then turned and walked back in the growing darkness. He stopped again where the sand had overtaken the bridge walk over the dunes. There was only the light from the living room windows of his beach house, and he stared out at the tide. It had turned while he was asleep. He watched the shoaling waves, the fractal patterns and insane geometries of the capillary waves colliding, chopping, and frothing, piling on top of each other till the shallows were overrun with depth. The sea churned. It seemed like a cauldron boiling, but unmoved. The waves grew higher crests and deeper troughs, and the white foam rode them up and down and mixed and bubbled. Then, in the great rising and falling water, he saw something. A small, pale white face, sputtering in the surf. Edward Harker stopped and squinted and tried to look closer. He could see the tiny face, that of a little girl, gasping for air. He saw the small bone-white hand grasp for the surface. He saw her eyes and nose. He saw her mouth gasp for air, and he knew then he was not seeing a figment of pareidolia caused by the white water and darkness. His heart quickened. He called out, but the girl only struggled to keep her tiny face above water in the devastating troughs, 50 yards from where he stood. He looked up and down the beach. There was no one. No towels or beach chairs, no footprints besides his own. No family or lonely beachgoers. No sign of anyone but himself. He saw a tiny white hand break the surface again. Edward ran into the surf, lifting his knees high to his waist until the water pulled too hard and slowed him, and then he dived into an oncoming wave and began to swim. He'd always been a strong swimmer, competing in high school and then in college until greater monetary pursuits took hold. His arms left the water only to be swallowed by an oncoming crest. He kept his head up and focused on the girl's face, which disappeared and reappeared with each breaker. He closed in, the water too deep for him to stand, and the riptide flushing him out to sea faster than he could swim. Just yards away, he saw her face so clearly, saw her eyes dark and wet, saw her mouth open, gulping air and thin strands of wet, dark hair which clung to her face. She dipped behind a swell and Edward pushed through, reaching for her arms. He crested the last wave, but she was gone. He treaded water, sputtering, breathing hard, swallowing salt brine. He turned and looked for her, but she was not there. He saw the beach, far away now. He felt his hands and legs heavy and freezing. He searched the water with his arms, dove below the surface and swam the swirling currents in the darkness. He reached and strained, but there was nothing, except an empty, swirling abyss. When he surfaced, there was only thrashing surf and dark sky, and the light from his living room windows to guide him to shore. Edward took one last dive and resurfaced farther from shore, nearly out to sea. He began to panic. He swam parallel to the beach to escape the rip current, and when he was far enough down the shoreline, he began to swim toward land. Waves broke over him and helped push his body closer. He put his feet down, stumbled to knee-deep water, and heaved for breath. His clothes felt an extra 50 pounds. He shivered and shook on the dark sand. He sat for a moment, staring out at the great black sea, wondering, questioning what he'd seen, or what he felt so certain he had seen. The white crests rolled like lips of a great dark mouth opening to swallow him whole, dotted with little bits of foam white faces. The police took 40 minutes to arrive at his house. There was only one unit patrolling the island during the off-season, and the nearest hospital was 20 miles away. When drowning did occur, there was often little that could be done. The officer stood in his doorway and took his statement. Still sopping wet because he had no other clothes, he walked them to the beach and pointed out where he swore he'd seen the little girl. The officers, a portly man, Officer Dunkirk, and a young brown-haired woman, Officer Tannaby, both wore jackets and wide-brimmed hats. They stopped taking notes. They looked up and down the beach. "It's not likely," Dunkirk said. "A girl that age will be out here on her own, particularly in this weather at this time of year. Hell, you're probably the only one around for a mile. You do know that hurricane is coming, right, Mr. Harker?" "Low light and all the chop in the water can play tricks on the eyes, sir," Tannaby said. "I almost reached her," Harker said. "I saw her. I was only a few yards away." "You sure it was a girl?" "Yes, I'm sure it was a girl. I could tell by her face." "About how old do you think?" Young. 7, 9 maybe. Too young. I have a 10-year-old daughter. She looked younger. I was that close to her. I don't know what she was doing out there. There was no one else. No one else at all." The officers spread out. One questioned the houses to the north, one to the south. Few houses were occupied. No one had a little girl, and no little girls were unaccounted for. They called into the island station. There was no reported missing persons, and, so far, his was the only call that night. Harker sat on the couch as the officers conferred with the dispatchers at the station. Outside was pitch black. "You see, Mr. Harker, we don't have any missing persons reported or even pending between here and the mainland," he said. Harker, head down, nodded. "I know what I saw." "Are you all right, Mr. Harker? I mean, personally, is everything okay?" she inquired. "Why do you ask that? Have you had anything to drink tonight? Any prescription medications?" "It happens sometimes, Mr. Harker. People think they see things in the surf. It wouldn't be the first call I've answered like this where somebody thought they saw someone drown or go under. It's a trick of the light. You think you saw the face of a little girl drowning in the waves. It was probably just sea foam. It's rough out there and cold, and no one else is around." They left, and Harker stood fully clothed in a hot shower to wash all the salt and sand off his pants and shirt, and then put them through the washing machine and dryer while he walked naked through the many rooms of the house in the dark. He fell asleep on a couch on the upper floor. In the morning, he realized he hadn't eaten in 2 days. He dressed and stopped at Ike's Diner for breakfast, and then drove to the Food Lion for groceries. He bought beach clothes at discount prices from Waves, along with several pairs of sweatpants and sweatshirts. He paid with his black credit card that was thick as a page from a picture book. The clerk swiped the card and it cleared, and Harker was relieved the card hadn't been cut off yet. He stopped at a liquor store and loaded up with beer, bourbon, and wine. He planned to forget about the previous evening, and the previous 3 months. He stopped at the local post office and scanned the walls for photographs of missing persons. There were only 2, both from the 80s. 2 women with feathered hair and grainy smiles, caught in some candid moment when the entire world wasn't being recorded and splashed over the media. A radio played in the post office. A voice urged people along the coastline to travel inland. The high gray clouds were building upward, layering heavy atop one another. The governor was going to make an announcement. Edward Harker left. He dressed in warmer, dry clothes, ate more food, drank some beer, and started feeling more like himself. He thought about the girl he'd seen, and decided that maybe he had been imagining things, a result of his overnight drive from Manhattan, the stress, the lack of food, the chop in the low light. Maybe he was cracking, but now he felt warm and full. From inside the house, he could watch the waves and feel more of the peace that he'd hoped for when he left the city. He turned on the television and watched digital images of the big swirling mass over the edge of Florida. Meteorologists predicted it would head up the coast, a Category 4, which could grow even stronger. Images flashed on the television of houses whipped with wind and rain, palm trees bent, leaves slashed the air. A storm surge rose and careened over storm walls and washed down main streets up and down the Florida coast. He turned it off and drank some more, then looked to the ocean outside his window and wondered how it would be here in his safe haven. What would it look like when the waves toppled over the dunes and washed into this house? What would it be like to stand on the porch and let the 130-mile-per-hour winds blow over him? What would it feel like as the storm approached? The landline rang and it sounded like a fire alarm in the silent house. He nearly jumped from his skin, his nerves frayed at the sudden encroachment. He'd forgotten there even was a landline. He stared at the ringing phone and waited. It kept ringing. He finally answered. "Edward? Edward, is that you? It's Meredith." "It's me." "Edward, they're looking for you. You need to answer your phone, answer an email, something." "How did you find me here, Meredith?" "I actually keep a Rolodex." "What can I tell them, Edward?" "Tell them I'm taking a leave of absence." "That's not good enough. It's not just the partners, Edward. The FBI, the SEC, and the IRS are here. They're actually here, in the office." "I'm out of town. I'll be for some time." "I can't tell them that. They're talking about issuing a warrant. You need to come back here." "Forward it to my attorney," Edward said. "And don't tell them that you talked to me." "What should I tell Lucy?" "You've talked to her?" "She called here looking for you." "What about Suzanne?" "I haven't heard from her. She and Lucy are still with her parents in Connecticut as far as I know." Edward took the phone away from his ear for a moment, looked down, and sighed. He thought for a moment. He wanted some deep and meaningful message to send to his only child, but there was nothing. Anything and everything he could say would be meaningless. Tell Lucy that Daddy will be home soon. I just had to take a trip. His assistant of 20 years said nothing, but he thought he could hear her cup her hand over the receiver of the phone for a moment. What she was doing on the other end he could only imagine. Maybe she was hiding the fact that she was on the phone with him, perhaps talking to federal officials, telling them where they could find him. He didn't know, and all he had now was trust, as tenuous as it was. "I don't think I can hold them off much longer," Meredith said. "Don't worry, you're not in any trouble." It'll be fine." He hung up the phone before she could continue, and then unplugged the line. Fronts clashed in the evening, and the swirling wind and rain blew both warm and cold by the time Edward was drunk. He watched the television. He saw nothing of himself on the news. Every channel talked of the impending storm, the first hurricane in 5 years, and everyone treated it like it was royalty. The swirling red mass that quickened its step up the eastern coastline stretched 250 miles across and sustained winds of 140 miles per hour. In his alcohol haze, the image on the screen became somewhat ominous and humorous at the same time, with the eye of the hurricane a deep black and the surrounding areas red. It came to resemble the profile of a human skull. Edward laughed and threw a beer bottle behind him, which smashed on the hardwood floor, and he cried out that the apocalypse was never ending. He yelled at the screen, "I'm not leaving!" He left his house in the brooding dust and walked to the ocean again. The whitecaps rose and fell like dim stars, blinking on and off in the great expanse of the universe. The wind was whipping. His clothes pulled against his skin. The breakers were crashing. He thought, in the distance, he saw a fisherman with his surf rod arcing up 15 feet in the air, but his eyes were blurred from the alcohol. He shook his head to clear his vision and looked again, seeing nothing. It seemed that everything around him was a ghost. He turned and looked back at the waves, and there, in the surf, he saw her again. A pale white face, struggling in the waves, eyes wide and terrified, dipping below the surface and rising. He saw her little pale hands break the surface. His mind hesitated, but something deep in his core urged him on. He didn't care if it was a hallucination. The sight of her struggle, the idea of slipping to her cold death in the raging sea, was overwhelming. He was in the water, the shock of the cold sobering him up momentarily before the blur of the waves and the shifting currents plunged him into a spinning morass of confusion. He swam, pumped his arms, kicked his legs against the froth. 100 yards from the beach, he stopped and looked about. She was gone, and he was collapsing under the crush of the waves. He turned in all directions again. She was lost. That tender, terrified face was gone again. This time he struggled back to shore. He swallowed too much seawater and collapsed onto his hands and knees, then retched on the beach. He turned on his back and sat up. The cold water was washing over his lap. He stared out at the ethereal tide and listened to the ghosts in his head, and he prayed to God that he could one day do one good thing, like save a little girl from chaos. But of course he couldn't even save himself from the chaos, let alone save his own daughter from knowing her father would be sent to prison. She would be a victim of it too. He stared out to where he'd last seen the drowning girl and, in the darkness, saw her face once again, struggling, gasping for breath. In that moment he felt sheer terror. He stood up and knew he saw something preternatural, a memory drudged up from the murky bottom, set to toss about in the waves to torment him. Or perhaps a hallucinogenic product of his tumultuous mind, breaking under the waves of pressure. She struggled and gasped and slapped at the waves. She dipped and reappeared, her mouth opened wide to scream. But there was no sound he could hear over the crashing surf. He stood and watched her for an hour in horror, his mind spinning, questioning what it all meant. She never drowned. She never swam. She only struggled in the current. He waited till he was soaked to his core with cold, then finally turned his back on her and walked the bridge to his home. Every thought he'd entertained until this moment suddenly flushed from his mind. Edward kept trying to speak, as if his own words and sounds would suddenly make the world real again. But he couldn't summon the breath, or the words, or anything but a tearful squeak and gasp. In the night he wandered, dripping wet, bottle in hand, through the various rooms and levels of the beach house. The lights were off, and he passed before the windows and mirrors which refused to show his reflection. He eventually sat straight up on a couch on the top floor, staring out into the darkness at the seething waters beyond the dunes. In the night, he could see the white caps of the sea, and in them he saw 1,000,000 drowning faces of 1,000,000 little girls, struggling for breath. He woke to an alien sunlight over the coastline dunes. The water churned but looked restrained, as if holding back from the land. The bottle was on the floor beside him, its remaining contents spilled out. The salt and sand irritated his skin. His mouth was bone dry, and there was an ache behind his eye, as if they had strained too much. He felt lost and disoriented, looking out at the calm sun and slight breeze which bent the cord grass stalks. He stood and walked to the massive windows and wondered for a moment if he were still dreaming, but the pain in his head was too great to be imagined. His shirts and pants had solidified with salt over the course of the night, and the material was stiff and creased. He opened the sliding glass door to the porch. The air was light and unusually warm. He looked around and everywhere was silent, but for the crashing waves beyond the dunes. Edward turned and went back in the house. He showered for a long time, drinking the water falling from the shower head to wet his cracked throat. Images of the girl, what he had seen, coupled with a foreboding sense of death, flashed through his mind, and he tried to force them out. He was dried and dressed in the clothes he'd purchased from the beach shop. His head felt momentarily reinvigorated. He found his cell phone and plugged it into the charger, watching as it powered on and came alive again with text messages, emails, voicemails that had all been held back. The chime seemed to echo in the house for hours, and then there was the heavy-fisted knock on the door. Edward cautiously walked down 2 flights of stairs to the front door and could see an official-looking jacket and broad-brimmed hat through the clouded glass of the entry door. Officer Dunkirk, his belly spilling out over his belt, sidearm holstered and barely noticeable against his bulk. "Good morning, Mr. Harker." Edward looked around as if expecting an armada to be waiting in the wings. "Good morning," he said. Is, something wrong?" "Why don't you step outside for a moment so we can talk?" Edward stepped out onto the porch landing. The air was unseasonably warm. The light breeze seemed to be holding back, waiting. "I come here for 2 reasons," the officer said, as if orating before a southern congregation. "For one, we received a request to do a wellness check on you." "A wellness check?" "To make sure you're okay. It seems there are many people quite worried about you and wondering where you are." "Oh, I'm fine," he said. "I can see that. The second reason I'm here is that the state has issued an evacuation order for the coastal areas." Edward looked around at the bright sky and warm sun. Dunkirk half grinned. "Oh, don't be fooled, Mr. Harker. This is what they call the calm before the storm. All the weather we've experienced this week has been pushed out, making way for the granddaddy of them all. It's not going to be pretty, and I suggest you start packing and leave. Landfall will be tomorrow." "Oh, I see. May I ask what brings you down here at such an inopportune time?" "I was just looking to get away," he said. "I needed to clear my head." Dunkirk stared at him knowingly for a time. "A little solitude can refocus the mind, I suppose," he said. "I understand there may be some issues you're dealing with up north." "Nothing that involves local law enforcement," Harker said. Dunkirk smiled. "Not yet, anyway. It's not really my purview, and I don't much care one way or the other, Mr. Harker. Powerful men have powerful problems. I've always preferred a simpler life." He looked around the empty streets and the empty houses. "I can't make you evacuate, Mr. Harker. Probably wouldn't even if I could. But the truth of the matter is I'm getting the hell out of here too. These islands are not the place to be. even for law enforcement. When a storm like this hits, I don't have the time or resources to be making sure every individual gets out of Dodge. We pull our forces back inland, wait for it to blow over, and then come out to clean up the mess. If you think you can ride out this storm in this house, I'm sorry to say you are sorely mistaken. Now, whatever it is you're dealing with in New York is nothing compared to what's coming up this coast. Harker looked at him and then looked away and back into his home. I appreciate your concern, officer. I don't yet know what my plans are. Dunkirk nodded and looked down for a moment. That's fine. I understand. You know, 20 years ago we had a direct hit from Hurricane Samantha. I was only 25 years old at the time. It was a Category 3, I believe. We pulled back, same as we do now, and after the full brunt of the storm had moved north, we came back in with fire trucks and ambulances and a fleet of emergency electricians from the electrical company. You know, the guys that make a year's salary wading through all the leftover shit from one of these storms. Anyway, I just want to tell you so you know what you're looking at. We started moving up Ocean Trail Drive, checking houses, looking for anyone that might have been left behind, getting the electrical wires out of the road. Everything you see here around you had nearly been washed away. Houses toppled over, trees uprooted, cars taken by the waves and planted in people's backyards. Sure, it was bad, but most of it was just things, stuff, material objects that could be replaced. Until we got to 74 Ocean Trail just down that way. Dunkirk pointed south. The doors and windows had all been blasted out, and inside was an old man, sitting in a rocking chair. I knew him vaguely. Tough old bastard. The kind of tough old bastard that would rather wait out a storm than leave his house. But he was dead, sitting in that chair. The storm had picked up a bit of fencing and sent it through his window and right through his chest. Rain came in through the window, flooded the place. He was dead and soaked, and looking like a fish you see washed up on shore. Way it looked to me, he had pulled his chair around in front of the window to watch the great and powerful show. But you don't, and even I don't, know what goes on in the middle of these kinds of storms, Mr. Harker. Especially on these islands. We don't know because no one sticks around to find out, and the ones that do usually don't make it. A Category 3, Edward said. That's right. Not so bad compared to this big boy that's on our doorstep now. Don't let the pretty weather fool you, son. Take a look in the sky. You know what you're not seeing? What's that? Birds, Mr. Harker. They're all gone. And y'all should be too. Harker walked the beach during the day while the sky was still clear and the ocean maintained a cordial surface calm. He wouldn't come back out at dusk or night, not just because the storm was expected to make landfall, but because he couldn't handle any more potential lapses of his sanity. Instead, he walked during the highest sun and trudged far north on the island. After an hour, he rounded a bend which signaled the final tip of the island. He stood for a moment, legs tired from the long walk in the sand, but his mind feeling remarkably clear. The ease of having left something completely and totally behind. He decided he would not be returning to New York now or ever. If they wanted him, they could come find him. And then, he would take the punishment that would be dished out, much to the chagrin of rival hedge fund gurus and the public. He would be forced into bankruptcy, possibly serve jail time. He was about to be reborn into a new life, one of shame and unimportance, and most likely poverty. He was about to become a very small man, and that was feeling fine with him. His soon-to-be changed life was not without its regrets. Suzanne had married a rich man. She'd been bred to do so from the finest Greenwich stock, and now that his empire was collapsing and his fleeting wealth sucked up by the world, she would surely find another way to maintain her lifestyle. Marrying Suzanne had been a bad decision, but at the time he envisioned a different kind of life, not one corrupted by money, but one that was suffused with love. Between them, perhaps, that was a dream. But with his daughter Lucy, that dream could have been reality. He and his daughter were bound by nothing so superficial as money. She was the one thing in his life that could be said to be true and real. But he had become so wrapped up in his high-powered, high-stakes life, so lost in the chaos of it, he had squandered his opportunity to truly find a bond with her, to truly be a father, and to protect her. But there was still time. Now, with his former life being laid to rest, there would be infinitely more time. He would be a different man than Lucy had known, but he could still be her father. This obstacle in his life, the press and the federal investigation, could not break him yet. There were other ways to be strong, other things that could be faced down. He would weather this storm, and then anything beyond would merely be a desert of overcast skies. Being here and facing down the hurricane was a stand against it all. He took a last look at the dark strip of land to the north and turned his head back home. In the distance to the south, he could see a dark haze that built miles up into the sky. A stiff wind was beginning to pick up again. He heard something heavy move at the periphery of his sight. He turned and saw a lone wild horse hoofing the sand, spooked and shaking its long, triangular head. That night, the rain and wind started. The house began to creak and groan under the gale, to the point Harker could feel it shift beneath him. Spats of rain pelted the windows, and it sounded like some demented child throwing pebbles against the glass. He sat on the couch and watched the weather forecast on the television. It was only a matter of time before the power cut out. So, he listened to the last reports from the outside world. The edge of Florida had been devastated. Images of roofs torn off, uprooted trees, entire towns flooded underwater. Occasionally, the television newsfeed would cut to a panoply of 80s color, with a warning alert screeching across the audio. He sat and listened to the warning echo throughout the empty house. He stood and stared out the windows. His house was the only light in the impenetrable darkness. He looked but could only see his reflection streaked with horizontal streams of rainwater. Even the white froth of the rising ocean was hidden from him. A sound came from a floor below, faint at first. Harker ignored it as just another instance of the house complaining under the onslaught. Then it came louder and more insistent. Knocking. Someone at the door. Confused and concerned, Harker went to the front door on the second level, which opened toward the road. He flung the door open, but there was no one there. The wind blew him back. He shut the door and locked the deadbolt. The knocking came again, from the basement door on the bottom level, which opened to a concrete landing with the in-ground pool and the bridge to the beach. The knocks were heavy, like a giant fist was trying to break it down. He looked down the stairs to the dark rooms below. The knocking came louder. Harker walked to the bottom floor. It was a family room, with an old couch and television and a bedroom set off to the side, with 2 sets of bunk beds for renters with big families. The window blinds were all drawn shut. He flipped on the light. The knock came again, echoing throughout the empty house, threatening to knock the door off its hinges. Harker paused for a moment and then flung the door open. The light reached out into the darkness, but there was nothing there. He pushed his head out and looked left and right along the side of the house. So far, the landing remained fairly dry, shielded by the second and third story decks, although water was beginning to creep at its edges. Harker called out into the night, but there was only the sound of wind. He moved to shut the door again, doubting his sanity. He looked down and saw 2 small, wet footprints, fresh on the concrete, the bare feet of a child, come in from the rain. Somewhere in the darkened bedroom, a child laughed, and feet pattered across the floor toward him. Harker scrambled to the stairs, panicked by the sound of someone else in the house. He stopped at the second-floor landing, bracing to run, and turned to look back at the basement living room. The lights flickered and browned as the hurricane winds gained force. He caught a glimpse of something moving through the shadows. A flash of pale bare feet, and a dripping white nightdress. His senses whirled. He scrambled again as the lights fought back and returned fully illuminated. He ran to the third floor. A child's laughter followed. He was back in the great room and the sliding glass doors that looked over the dunes to the sea. The lights were flickering again as the storm ripped away his last hope of being able to see. Then all was black and gone. The wind blew and leaned against the house like Leviathan had come ashore and rested his back against the side. It may have been true for all the darkness he knew at that moment. He was left blind. Then he heard the footsteps, light at first, like a little girl's, and then growing heavier as they turned at the second-floor landing and ascended toward him. He pushed against the glass doors and felt them push back with the power of the storm. His eyes adjusted to the dark so that he could discern faint outlines of furniture and doorways. He watched as a thin, pale figure rose up the stairs, footfalls booming throughout the house. He watched until she neared the last step. There was nowhere left to run from here, except the balcony room, a tiny windowed chamber that reached over the roof, a place that would surely be blasted out by the tearing winds. He turned to run, but she was already there, standing in front of him, her dark, wet hair hanging over her pale, drowned face, and her eyes frothing white. When she spoke, it sounded like a bell rung from the bottom of the ocean, and he could suddenly see. It was as if he could see all of it at once, the whole storm, the totality of the chaos. Night became clear as day. He saw cyclones churning between the sky and the earth. He saw the sea rise, and waves break over the dunes and flood the ground, break through the doors and windows of the first floor, rise around his SUV and push it back across the road until it rolled like a river stone. He saw the wind sweep down and break tree limbs and send them sailing through the windows. He saw a great and malevolent eye, shining down from miles above the earth. He saw a great force rise up from the sea. He stood in his living room untouched, as if he had been separated from time and space and left to bear witness to the things man cannot see in the darkness of his limited mind. He saw a great swelling out at sea as if the ocean were suddenly pregnant. There rose a sloping mountain of water that came closer and closer to his shore. The water split into streams that ran down its back, and a great beast emerged from the depths and slouched toward the shore. Its massive mouth let loose a dim blood tide. Its hands were filled with anarchy and deceit. It stripped away dunes and homes, and in its rage, it let loose a terrible screeching howl, like 1,000-mile-per-hour wind. Everything was suddenly raised up into the sky. Cars and houses turned in the air like a toddler's mobile. Harker watched all of this. He saw. And the girl stood with him, her eyes flashing white, her hair dripping in an endless tide. The great beast lumbered toward Harker, secluded in his brittle home. It saw him, and lowered its massive head and opened its terrible mouth so wide it could swallow the beach house whole. Harker pressed his hands up against the glass panes and stared into the abyss of its throat. There, he could see, standing innocent and unknowing on the beast's tongue, Lucy. All seemed still for a moment as he gazed upon her, wearing the same clothes she'd worn when he last saw her, as if the beast had stolen her right out of his memory. "No," he said. "Why?" The girl spoke. All are lost. No one is spared. The storm swallows them all. The girl turned and looked at Harker, her eyes washing white with foam. The beast snapped its massive jaws shut, and it sounded as if a crack opened up in the earth. It took the police and cleanup crews 2 days before they reached Kerala, and, in his 45 years on Earth, Dunkirk had never seen such a sight. This was a devil of a storm, he told a crewman, and the old bird nodded in agreement. The whole place had been rolled flat as a prairie. Even the low tide was nipping at the edge of the multi-million-dollar properties. This place might have seen its last, he said, but it was really more of a prayer. Dunkirk pretended for a little while that he was immune to the curiosity, that he was taking the problems of work as they came, moving with the crews northward up the washed-out island. But his mind kept wandering to Edward Harker. They spent countless hours trying to get power restored so the real work could begin. But finally, Dunkirk said he was heading off. When the chief engineer asked where, Dunkirk didn't say, but just hopped into his four-wheel drive and drove further north on what used to be a road. He found Edward Harker's residence collapsed, pushed over as some great hand had set its palm against the southern wall and knocked it out of the way. Across the street, Dunkirk saw Harker's Navigator. Beautiful vehicle that it was, upside down in some deep scrub brush, laid over with trees. Dunkirk sighed deeply. It wasn't regret he felt, but the knowledge of what he would find inside, and the knowledge that he had to go in to see. It was his job, and it was more. It was bright out that day and unnaturally warm. Dunkirk made his way around to the back of the house where a great tear had opened up the eastern wall and shattered all the windows to let in the ocean. The house itself looked like a great whale had washed ashore and been eaten open by the wildlife. He tested the wood with his heft a moment, snapped on a flashlight, and climbed inside. There, on what was previously the 3rd floor, now only a platform hanging precariously in the air, he found Edward Harker, seated in his fine leather chair. His mouth was open, his head tilted back at an unnatural angle, and his eyes white with death. A crossbeam of wood rose out of the center of his chest like the mast of a ship run aground. Dunkirk squat beside the man and took his hat off and held it in his hand. He said a brief prayer for the dead and for all those who have been lost at sea or drowned. He put his hat back on and cautiously climbed out of the wreckage, mumbling to himself of what a crazy, goddamned world it was.
I met Carly 2 years ago. I remember how we met, too. It was honestly a bit of a freak occurrence. At the time, me and a friend of mine, Caleb, were spending the summer in his grandparents' old beach house up in Myrtle Beach. I remember I was standing in line at the movies, wigging out to Caleb about the new Halloween movie. I heard it was directed by the dudes who made Saw. I remember shouting in his face.
Yeah, the suck-ass ones,
he said, scoffing. I remember how I was even jumping around like a little kid hopped up on too much candy.
Come on, can't we just watch the new Conjuring movie instead?
I remember looking at him like, please tell me that was just a bad joke. It was no small secret. I was not a fan of these movies. Really, dude? I chided condescendingly.
What? What's wrong with it? I made a fake I'm so scared face. It's based on a true story.
He rolled his eyes and added,
At least it might have some actual scares in it. I've heard the new Halloween is just a gore fest.
As if, I scoffed. How can you beat a classic like Halloween? In my excitement, I bumped right into the girl in line behind me. This caused us to topple onto the ground, me landing elsewhere but right on top of her. For a moment, we stared at each other on the ground, facing each other with our eyes the size of serving platters. I stammered. Are you okay? She just continued staring back up at me, face chiseled in an expression of pure shock. From behind me, I could hear the sound of a photo snapping. Looking back, I saw Caleb standing there with a shit-eating grin, holding his phone up. Seeing this, I scrambled off of her to my feet. He started snickering, and I could see the crowd form around us. What the hell are you doing?
Oh, don't mind me,
he remarked, his grin still on full blast. I was about to try and rush him to snatch the phone and chuck it halfway across the street when from behind me I heard a soft voice ask,
Was it a good pick?
I snapped my head around to see her on her feet too. She was smirking kinda sheepishly. Instantly, my body tensed up again. I stuttered. She started giggling. My tongue froze again. Come on, dingus, you're blowing it here. Get your shit together. Pete. I finally blurted.
Huh?
She asked.
Come again?
My name is Pete. I chuckled nervously, feeling less than 2 seconds from a heart attack, and shakily held my hand out to her. She stared at me for a moment, seemingly confused. Her eyes seemed to lock directly onto mine. In a way, I could feel them boring through me. For a moment, I thought I could see something else in those eyes. Something like maybe worry or fear. I looked behind me to see that the line was moving. Caleb was third in line now to the ticket booth. I turned again, back to her, face still fixed in that worried-looking expression. I signaled to him that I'd be right there. He rolled his eyes and mouthed for me to hurry the hell up. I was the one with the money for tickets. Suddenly, she started blinking rapidly, broken from her stupor.
Huh?
She asked.
What happened?
Nothing. I just told you my name was Pete, and you just sort of zoned out there. Everything okay? She smiled again and nodded her head.
Yeah, sorry.
She said, chuckling.
Sometimes I just get lost in myself, you know. I'm Carly, by the way.
Well, you want to join me and my buddy? We're gonna see the new Halloween.
Sure, why not?
She smiled, and I bit my lip. I remember getting to the ticket booth and Caleb looked at me confused before grinning, knowing I just scored a date with my little embarrassment. The movie was enjoyable enough, but I was barely even concentrating on it. See, I'm one of those who will talk during a movie, even in the theaters. Despite almost getting into a fist fight with some of the other patrons on certain occasions because of this, Caleb would usually try to ignore me, but not her. Actually, turns out Carly was the same way. So we spent the entire time gawking, laughing, and chatting back and forth about the movie. Though, as I said, I was barely focused on the screen. I couldn't take my eyes off of her for more than 30 seconds without finding my gaze locked back on her. I mean, she was beautiful, sure. Drop-dead fucking gorgeous, in fact. But it wasn't just that. It was something else about her, something more, I don't know, hypnotic in a way. Still, bottom line, that night went from a great night to fucking amazing, all because I made a fool of myself. Towards the end of the movie, despite what I just said, somehow I didn't notice she'd laid her head on my shoulder and fallen asleep. When I woke her up, she jolted awake, frightened.
Huh? What happened?
She exclaimed, throwing her head left and right. Whoa, sorry. Didn't mean to scare you. Movie's over, though. She began to relax a little. I could tell she was still tense about something. Hey, is everything okay?
Oh, yeah. What time is it, though?
I looked at my phone. 12:30. Her eyes bugged out again. Why? What's wrong?
Oh, shit. My folks are gonna kill me. I was supposed to be home an hour ago.
She started ruffling her hands frantically through her hair. Hey, it's okay if you like. I can give you a.
No.
She blurted, startling me.
No. I mean, that's not necessary.
It's really no trouble, I said, trying to be reassuring, and pretty obviously failing. She shook her head and said,
No, really, it's fine. I don't live that far away anyway. It's better if I just go ahead and go. Plus, I stand a better chance of sneaking by unnoticed if I don't have another person announcing my presence, you know?
Oh, yeah. I conceded. Well, I had fun tonight. As she was turning to leave, I shot out my hand and shouted, Wait! She spun around. I started digging in my pockets, pulling out my ticket stub and pen, and scrawling my phone number. Call me sometime. Maybe we can hang out again. She giggled before pocketing my number and leaving. So, yeah. That's how all that started. It was only the weekend after that our second date was booked. This time being to the water park. That was where I learned she used to be on her high school swim team and work in the summertime as a lifeguard. I'll say this much. She could swim circles around my ass. Turned out that she lived right along the beachfront here in Myrtle Beach. I remember thinking how cool that was. I'm gonna call you Ariel from now on, I joked. Her face seemed to shrink at this. You know, from The Little Mermaid?
Oh, yeah. I know what you meant. Just, I don't know. I'd rather not be called that.
Oh, I said, feeling stupid. Sorry. She shook her head and grinned again.
Don't worry about it. Want to get some ice cream?
I immediately jumped up with a resounding, Hell yeah! Just like at the movies, that date went awesome too. We spent the entire day splashing around at the water park like little kids. Soon 6 o'clock rolled around and it started to get dark. That's when Carly insisted that she leave. Are you sure? I mean, the park's open for another couple of hours.
Yeah, I think it's better I go ahead and head back, though.
She winked and added, smiling.
Be nice to avoid another incident like last time, right?
Oh yeah, I said. Good point. I sighed, disappointed. I was really hoping to stay until closing. They turned the hot tubs on at 7 until closing. She walked up to me, smiling, and put her arms around my waist, whispering in my ear.
I had fun with you, though.
Following this, she planted a kiss on my cheek. That caused my heart to stop. She then turned and left, leaving me standing there, jaw slack. That night, I was up tossing and turning. I couldn't help it. I couldn't stop thinking about her. I kept having this dream where, for some reason, she was standing in front of the ocean, facing me, smiling warmly. She curls her finger, beckoning me forward. I start towards her, compelled by some force like a leash is pulling me towards her. She backs slowly into the ocean behind her. My own stride quickens. I reach out to her. Wait! I cry. She continues to be swallowed by the tide. I begin running for her, determined to reach her before she's gone. Just before the ocean swallows her, I leap forward, hurling myself headfirst like a spear into the water. Instantly, everything around me becomes black. I'm heading downwards, face first into a black, boundless, fathomless abyss. I hear nothing. My ears feel like they've been stuffed with cotton. My arms and legs feel like feathers on my body. Despite this, my lungs don't burn. In fact, I don't feel my lungs anymore. Instead, I feel a sort of resonance around me. a heart pounding all around me, like from a giant drum. It gets more and more intense, and I begin to feel sharp pains shooting across the sides of my neck. From below, I see thousands of human-looking figures swimming up from the abyss. They begin circling around me. My vision becomes blurry, rounded in a way. I look at my hands to see that there's now skin between each finger, forming webs between them. I'm shocked and horrified, yet I'm unable to scream. The people close in around me. I can see them clearly now. They're tall, green and scaly with palpitating gills on their necks and webbed hands. I just float, seemingly suspended in place, defying gravity in the dark, murky depths of the ocean. Each and every one of them looks the same as the gill man from the creature from the Black Lagoon. One of them was a female, judging from her breast's appearance, or at least the aquatic resemblance. The fish creature's eyes lock onto mine. I'm once again spellbound. She puts her webbed hands around my face, puckers her scaly lips, and...
Pete!
I was instantly pulled out of the dream. I was standing outside of the back deck of the condo in my boxers. Huh? How in the hell did I get here?
Pete, bro, what the heck is going on with you?
He asked, sounding more shocked at its bizarreness.
First you toss around in the bed, muttering to yourself like a crazy person. Now I find you out here damn near in the buff. Bro, you been smoking?
For a moment I just stood there. I didn't know how to begin making any kind of excuse. To even do that, I'd have to understand what was going on. But I didn't. All I knew at the moment was that, at one moment, I was sleeping, dreaming about chasing a pretty girl into the ocean. Next, I dream of being surrounded by fish people and becoming one myself. And now, there I was, out in the open in my fucking skivvies. Needless to say, I was far beyond confused. I stuttered. No. He continued looking at me, bewildered. I mean, not much.
So then, what the hell was going on?
Just to clarify, I don't smoke, drink, or do anything like that. Then again, I don't typically sleepwalk either, or dream of fish people for that matter. In the end, I just copped to the sleepwalking alibi, which I could tell he had difficulty buying. Despite this, probably because it was 3:30 in the morning, he just shook his head and went back to bed. But what the hell happened? How did I get here? Then another question popped into my head. How much farther would I have gone if Caleb hadn't woken me up? I started thinking about the dream again, standing in the ocean, facing Carly. Was that where I was going? To the ocean? Why? Now, the simplest explanation to all that was that I was a love-struck dumbass, and I guess my subconscious was trying to act out my latest wet dream. I mean, this was brought on, or likely was anyway, by Carly kissing me on the cheek. Yeah, that's it. That's all it is. I'm just having a weird dream about a girl, and I started sleepwalking. With that, I decided to go back to bed, though going back to sleep was nigh impossible. Instead, I spent the remainder of that night watching Netflix on my phone. About 6 o'clock or so, the sun just starting to peek out from above the horizon, I get a call from Carly. Hello. I answered, still pretty groggy. I was still tired, even if I couldn't sleep.
Hey there. Listen, you doing anything big tonight?
No, not really. Why?
You want to meet up at the beach later on tonight?
Sure, what time?
About 6-ish when the sun starts going down?
You're on. I heard her giggle on the other end before saying.
Awesome. See you there.
She hung up after that. I paid back smiling, watching the sunrise through the window. Petey, Oh boy, you've done it again. All that day, I felt free as the seagulls that were flocking on the beach, scrounging for breadcrumbs. Nothing was going to ruin my day. Caleb noticed this too.
What's got you so hyped, huh?
I just grinned.
Let me guess. It's that one girl, ain't it?
Maybe, I replied, not at all subtly. Why?
Well, I had to figure it was either that or you're still tripping ass on whatever it was you were on last night.
That made me pause. Up to then, I'd forgotten about that little incident.
Speaking of which, am I gonna get any story on what the fuck was going on there?
Oh, that, I replied, chuckling embarrassingly. I don't know. I guess I was just sleepwalking.
Sleepwalking, huh?
He scoffed and said,
Well, they do say there's a first time for everything. But I'm still wondering, what was making you wig out the way you were?
What do you mean?
I mean, you were flopping around worse than a live fish on the grill. You were also whispering something in your sleep. Something about, wait for me, or something. I don't know.
Now I was curious. See, like I'd been saying, I wasn't a sleepwalker. The same would apply to talking in my sleep as well. At the same time, it's not like I could call bullshit either. I mean, I was standing out in my underwear after apparently sleepwalking. That, plus the utterly weird-ass dream making my sleep pretty restless, all seemed to add up to what Caleb was saying. What wasn't adding up was why. Why did that happen? Why, after all my life of never having any problems with sleeping in a noisy city, am I now having incidents like the previous night? I thought again back to the water park.
I had fun with you, handsome.
Carly, I wondered. Is she the reason why? Yes, I know, that sounded cheesy enough to make every Hallmark Channel director blush. Hell, we'd only met. But what other explanation was there? Something else far in the back of my head told me that there was another aspect of this. This may not just be some love at first sight destined to be together forever type of deal here. But then again, what is it exactly? I decided then to ask Carly when I saw her that evening. How that would help, I wasn't sure. But the way I figured, it's the only way I was going to get some answer. So the day passed with me and Caleb just screwing around at the boardwalk. I had fun, of course, but at the same time, I just couldn't help thinking about the ocean. About Carly. I couldn't really explain it. But I was itching to go to the beach right then and there. No. Actually, it was more than that. I was being compelled, summoned to the beach somehow. Not only this, but my entire body felt hot as well. My insides felt like they were cooking inside my skin. I had to get out of my clothes. They were too hot. My mouth was dry. I needed the ocean. I needed water.
Yo, Pete!
I heard a voice shouting behind me.
The hell are you doing?
I snapped around to see Caleb standing in line for the ice cream stand, looking confused at me, looking down. I saw that I was in the open, stripped, buck-ass nude. I could see a crowd gathering around. I froze up. I stammered.
Dude, put your freaking clothes back on.
Quick as I could, I scrambled to put my jeans back on before me, and Caleb scurried out of the boardwalk and back to the condo. When we made it back, after slamming and locking the door and making sure the cops weren't on their way, he instantly started pressing me as to what had just happened. I don't know. I swear to God.
Look,
He said, exasperated.
I need you to be straight with me, okay? Are you high right now? Are you stashing any drugs around here? What's gotten into you? Because you're really starting to freak me out a bit here.
I shook my head. I'm telling you, I don't know. I'm not high. I don't know what just happened.
Okay. Well, Can you at least tell me what was going through your head when you decided to just up and present yourself for God and the world to see?
I don't know. I felt hot, like I was in an oven. I felt like I wanted to get out of my skin. I remembered wanting to go to the ocean so badly for some reason, like I was being called to it. I don't know. He stood blinking at me in confusion. That's all I remember. I'm serious, though. I'm not high. He rubbed his eyes. He was just as lost as I was, if not, understandably more so.
So, let me get this straight here.
He said, sighing.
You're feeling called to the ocean, and you feel like your skin is too hot, which then makes you wander off and strip out in the open. Twice now, all of this, and you're not high.
My face fell into my hands. Despite that being exactly what happened, how could I make him understand that? Hell, how was I supposed to make myself understand that? I don't know, man. I cried through my palms. He sighed and said,
Look, bro. We've been buds since high school, okay? You know you can tell me shit. I got your back. Just tell me what's going on.
I don't know, I exclaimed. How many times do I have to say it? I don't know. Ever since last night, after Carly left the water park.
Aha.
He interrupted, a grin parting the corner of his lip.
So that's what this is all about. Why didn't you just say that in the beginning?
Say what?
That girl's got your balls.
He threw his head back and cackled. This didn't amuse me. What are you talking about?
Come on, dude. Ever since you bowled her over at the movies, you've been going nuts about her. After seeing her at the water park, all dolled up in a swimsuit, you're fucking whipped.
He chuckled. Whatever, man. Screw this, I said, getting up and stomping towards the door. I felt his hand grab my shoulder, stopping me.
Whoa! Where the hell you think you're going?
Out, I snapped, agitated at his snide remarks. As well as this, I started feeling hot again, stuffy and hard to really breathe. He started rapping his knuckles on my forehead.
Hello? Anyone home? You just forget that the cops are probably looking for you after that little stunt at the boardwalk?
Look, I'll be fine. Just move. I batted his hand away and continued for the door. I could now feel my legs getting lighter and lighter, weaker.
You plan on telling me where you're sauntering off to?
I glared at him. My vision started to blur a bit, but I could still see him. The beach. There. Happy now, Dad? I opened the door. Outside, the sky was starting to turn bright, burning orange. The sun was going down. I have to go to Carly. I have to get to the ocean. My vision blurred more and more. My head began to spin. It felt so hot, so dry. I had to get to the ocean quickly. I was burning up. Before I knew it, I was taking off at full speed. My mind was blank. Only one thing occupied my focus: getting to the ocean and seeing her. My legs were weak, and my lungs were all but flaccid, but I didn't care. I was gonna get to the beach, to the ocean. The world around me started to warp, looking more and more rounded. The closer I got, the hotter I felt, inside and out. I imagined the way the waves would cool me off once I made it. I'd feel like being a fish. Soon, I was able to see the beachfront. It was mostly empty, being that the sun was half gone now. There, almost silhouetted against the sunset's burning red beam, Carly stood, facing me, waiting for me, and calling to me. When I made it to the shoreline, she smiled. I stood, breathless, burning up and feeling weak. The way my body felt, I thought my skin would melt off like butter in a microwave. Still smiling, She curled her finger at me, winking. I began staggering mindlessly towards her. I saw her take baby steps backward with every step I took towards her. The water felt cool across my skin as my feet entered. Not too hot, not too cold. It was soothing. The further I waded in, the more my body seemed to cool off. More than that, it seemed to go numb, like it almost wasn't there anymore. This started from my feet and continued through my body the further I entered. She continued stepping backward, descending further into the tide. From behind her, I saw what looked like dorsal fins approaching in my direction. What the hell? Are those sharks? Despite this, I keep moving forward. I couldn't stop. The fins started circling around me and Carly. Carly finally disappeared, and I dove headfirst after her. The ocean was murky, making it impossible to see how deep it was at the bottom. It seemed to go on forever as well. I swam and swam as hard as I could, struggling to continue forcing myself downward. As I went along, I felt sharp, searing pains shoot throughout my body, starting from my ribs. My eyes widened when I saw 3 large gashes or slots open wide across them. It felt like someone had taken a serrated knife across my body, flaying me open. When I went to feel them, my heart almost stopped completely. Seeing that large fleshy webs were now connecting between my fingers. I could feel panic course through me, and I began flailing frantically to pull myself back to the surface. Eventually, I couldn't feel my arms or legs anymore. Despite this, I noticed I wasn't sinking. Instead, I just floated there, suspended in the middle of the ocean depths. All around me, I watched as a bunch of figures started swimming around. They swarm in one large horde around me. A school of fish, essentially forming a sort of ring. The longer I watched, the more I was able to distinguish a few of them individually. That's when I realized those were the same fish people from my dream. All of them were green and scaly, with webbed hands and gills across their ribs and neck. I could see their rounded, marbled eyes examine me as they revolved around me. Suddenly they stopped. They now floated still like I was, seeming to defy gravity, as one of them floated up from directly below me. As it swam closer, I could see that it was female, just like my dream, with scaly, slippery breasts and an hourglass-shaped body. She also had long, light-colored strands that resembled hair, though likely wasn't hair, that flowed from her head. Her mouth parted in what I guess was a smile, exposing many rows of small ivory inlaid teeth. She took my hands in hers, and from around me, I heard the simultaneous sound that reminded me of what a humpback whale sounds like when doing a mating call. I could do nothing except float there, my body being too exhausted. Her lips began to move, and just very faintly, I could hear her say, in a deep-toned version of Carly's voice,
"Kiss me, my love."
She then worked her webbed hand up to my neck, cupping it, before meeting her lips to mine. She pulled away and looked behind me, opening her mouth and letting out a heart-stopping shriek. The moment our lips touched, the whale-calling noise from the others increased in pitch. Her lips stayed stuck to mine for almost a full minute, when from the corner of my eye, I noticed the others begin to disperse and start swimming around frantically, the way bees do when the hive is disturbed. When I looked behind to see what the commotion was about, my jaw dropped. It was Caleb, swimming headfirst straight for me. Relief flowed through me. I'm saved. He'll be able to get me. However, my relief was cut off as I watched them. begin to swarm around him. He struggled furiously, viciously punching and kicking at his assailants, but it did him no favors. They were too quick to sink their piranha-like teeth into his flesh and eat him. Caleb's eyes were wide with horror, his face twisted with excruciating pain as they continued to maul him. Some of them grabbed at his flailing limbs and began pulling, causing them to start ripping from his body. I could see a cloud of red spread across the murky water. I finally managed to break from my earlier state of entropy, and I darted through the water to try and get away from them. I was stopped, however, when the fish woman tightly grasped my ankle. She pulled me back, embraced me, and said,
"Stay with me, handsome. We'll never die. We'll always be together. Down here."
She moved in to kiss me once again when I shoved her away. For a second, she was still. Her rounded eyes somehow opened wider in shock before she let out another shriek and darted through the water towards me. With quicker reflexes than I ever thought possible, I dodged her just as she would have seized me. I was able to grab her and sink my teeth, now serrated like hers, into her neck. She let out a series of sharp screams that echoed throughout the abyss around us as she squirmed against me. With a single jerk, I tore a chunk from her scaly neck, the size of my palm. Her body almost immediately relaxed, and I let go of her. She fell slowly to the dark, boundless depths below. When I looked up, I saw the others staring back at me, horrified and disgusted. Having all but devoured Caleb by that point, I could tell that I was now their second course after what I'd just done. Thinking quickly, I took off, shooting straight up through the water. I didn't dare chance a look behind me. I didn't need to. Their enraged shrieks signaled that they were gaining on me fast. I focused solely on the surface of the ocean. Soon, I was able to see the surface. With one final push, I did it. I broke the surface. From there, I quickly scrambled back to the shore before collapsing. Exhausted, once again. It was at least a good 10 or 15 minutes that I just laid there, completely spent both physically and mentally. It was sort of a slow digression. The next thoughts and emotions I felt. Starting with relief. I had made it out. My body looked normal again, looking like regular human flesh rather than a fish like it was earlier. Then came complete confusion. What was that? What the fuck just happened down there? What was happening to me? This was then replaced by grief over Caleb, my friend, who'd always had my back since high school, who tried to save me from whatever the fuck that was in the ocean. Now fish food. Finally, this was capped off with a sense of raw terror. They're after me now, aren't they? I knew they wanted to kill me for what I did down there. I had seemingly betrayed them and murdered one of them. For that, they won't forgive me. I was able to stumble my way back to the condo, where I immediately began packing everything of mine I could find. Looking back, I'd likely forgotten a few things, but I couldn't have cared less. I just wanted to get the hell out of Dodge the first chance I could. I was on the highway by sunrise, heading out of Myrtle Beach. I haven't gone back since then, and I never want to. They're still there. I just know it. Somewhere deep beneath the ocean, farther down than most will ever see. They're still there waiting for me to return so they can finish me. And they'll never stop, for they don't die like the rest of us. Now, though, I suppose neither do I. I still don't know exactly how my body became the way it is, but I'm willing to bet it had something to do with Carly. How and or why, though, I don't think I'll ever be able to tell you. All I can say is, I'm scared. For the past 2 years now, I've essentially shut myself away in my house, living as a hermit. I don't want to go back, but it's getting harder and harder to resist. My body always feels so hot, and I can't physically exert myself much at all anymore without feeling breathless and weak. I've managed to get by making money working from home on my computer, along with living off of delivery, pizza, and takeout. But I'm worried I won't last much longer. Even as I say this, my body feels so hot, and I grow weak, barely able to stay conscious. It's the ocean. I can feel it. It's calling me to it, and I don't want to go.
Scaling what had become his favorite sand dune, Landis made a concerted effort to excise all the troubling thoughts churning inside his skull. The dune was no place for fretting or worrying about things beyond one's control. It was a place for soul healing and mind clearing, a happy place amongst all the death and uncertainty. Reaching the dune's apex, Landis got himself into a comfortable sitting position, then stared out across the vast glittering seascape that surrounded the island. The sight of it made quick work of the tension that had built up inside him, causing all the stress and anxiety he was feeling to melt away like ice in the Sahara.
Mesmerizing, isn't it?
Startled by the unexpected query, Landis sat bolt upright and jerked his head left to see who'd disturbed him. To his immense surprise, he found Mary Simmons, the Canadian journalist he had met the second night at sea, standing at the base of the dune, an awkward expression on her cute sunburnt face. Aside from the heavy bags under her eyes, she looked exactly as she had several days prior, uncommonly beautiful with her naturally warm skin tone, striking green eyes, and long curly hair. "Oh," Landis said, a mixture of anxiety and bitterness bubbling inside him. "What are you, doing here?"
Well,
Mary said, clasping her hands together sheepishly.
we just got done gathering up a bunch of materials from the jungle to build a new SOS sign, which we did on the other end of the beach.
She motioned to Landis's right to show him her handiwork, but Landis kept his gaze on her.
In any case, I worked up a pretty good sweat doing that, and was thinking about taking a dip. Then I saw you up here and figured we could talk, if you're so inclined.
Doing his best to keep the anxiety and bitterness at bay, Landis focused on her ensemble, which consisted of a white blouse, Daisy Duke-style shorts, and a pair of purple flip-flops. "You find a bathing suit, or do you plan on swimming in your clothes?"
Neither.
Mary said.
Skinny dipping all the way.
Landis frowned at her.
Kidding. I have a bathing suit on underneath.
"Funny. Were your swim plans all you wanted to discuss?"
Actually, I've been wanting to come see you since we arrived here. Things have just been so crazy.
Landis bobbed his head at that. Between scrambling for their lives after the explosions rocked the cruise ship, finding their way to this island in the dark, coping with the immense loss of life, and setting themselves up until help arrived, crazy fairly well encapsulated the last 48 hours. "Yeah, they have." He scooped up a handful of sand and absently let it drain through his fingers. "So, what'd you want to talk about?"
Come on, Brendan,
Mary said, using his first name instead of his last, which he preferred.
You know.
Right, the High Seas Luau. He gazed back out at the glittering water, recalling the huge mixer. Being his first cruise, Landis hadn't been sure what to expect, so he decided to show up early. Mary, coincidentally, had done the same, heading straight to the bar in order to get ahead of the crowd. They ended up arriving at the same time, and Landis offered to buy her a drink. Mary had readily accepted, with the caveat that she be allowed to order for both of them. Landis said sure, and soon they were drinking Long Island iced teas and chatting like old friends. One drink led to two, and before long they moved to their own table for a little more privacy. Thereafter, conversation flowed easily, leading Landis to believe real chemistry existed between them. He had been on the verge of asking her to slow dance when, quite out of the blue, several of her friends had showed up and whisked her away, leaving Landis wondering what the hell he had done wrong. Things had gone to shit shortly after that, depriving him and his bruised ego the chance to confront her about it. Until now.
To set the record straight, my friends didn't rescue me from anything that night. They pulled me away to deal with some stupid drama between a married couple we came with. Had nothing at all to do with you.
Landis locked eyes with her, felt himself soften. Seriously? Because up until they arrived, I really liked the way things were going.
Seriously. And I like the way things were going too. I just wish I had come to tell you sooner.
Knees beginning to ache from sitting in the same position too long, Landis shifted around in the sand, straightening his legs.
So, did the married couple ever resolve their drama?
Mary's gaze fell to the sand and lingered there momentarily.
No. It continued into the early morning, when the explosions went off. They were near the third one that took out most of the lifeboats. I wound up being the only one from my group to make it to the island.
Oh, Jesus. I'm sorry,
Landis said.
That was stupid of me.
Mary shook her head.
No, it's okay.
Her gaze reconnected with his.
You know, I feel a bit silly talking to you from down here. Like a peasant beseeching their laird for more land or whatever. Mind if I join you?
Sure. Plenty of room up here.
Excellent, my lord,
Mary said, doing a little curtsy. She backed up a few paces, then bounded forward, scaling the dune in 9 hearty strides. At the top, she plopped down beside Landis and took a few beats to catch her breath.
I love your shirt, by the way.
Indicating his black Foo Fighters tee.
Everlong is like one of my all-time faves.
Landis beamed at this revelation. He couldn't have agreed more.
Yeah,
Mary went on.
That line about not stopping when I say when?
Geez, lady, where have you been all my life?
Mary didn't miss a beat.
Hello, I've waited here for you. Everlong.
They sang in unison, giggling at their collective corniness. After the giggling subsided, Mary stood back and took in the surrounding view.
Not bad, mon ami. I can see why you like it up here so much.
Yeah, Landis said, remaining seated.
It definitely speaks to me. Far more than I thought it would.
That's right. You mentioned at the luau that you hadn't spent much time near the ocean.
Landis sagged his head in mock embarrassment.
Sadly, no. My family took a trip to Lake Superior once when I was a kid, but that was as close as I'd gotten to it prior to landing in Miami last week. My folks weren't much for traveling outside our little slice of Nebraska.
Mary nodded.
I also recall you mentioning relocating somewhere more coastal. Right before my friends really interrupted us. Never did get to hear you elaborate.
Landis got to his feet and stretched his back.
Don't know. A lot of places sound good. But to me it makes the most sense to choose some place with a lot of techie jobs.
Oh yeah, you're one of those cybersecurity nerds.
Guilty as charged.
Okay, so what places are those?
Well, on the West Coast there's San Diego, San Francisco, and Seattle. You got Tampa and Miami down south, Norfolk and Savannah out east. and Honolulu way out in Hawaii.
Don't forget Vancouver and Halifax.
Sure. I always wanted to visit Australia.
No, silly, Canada.
Canada has beaches?
Yes, it has beaches. Are you?
Mary paused there and looked at him.
Oh, you're fucking with me.
Landis grinned. Yes, I'm fucking with you. I know you're proud of your Canuck roots. Mary pursed her lips.
You could do worse.
I'm sure. Waving a dismissive hand his way, Mary rotated to her left, facing inland.
Anyway,
she said, nodding towards the wild vegetation that occupied most of the island's surface.
This place wouldn't be such a bad option either. You know, if it wasn't so remote, and so devoid of other people.
Landis joined her in surveying the island's lush greenery. This is going to sound a little geeky, but did you ever watch the show Lost from the early 2000s?
I'm Canadian, not Amish,
Mary said.
Of course I watched it. Great show. Stupid ending.
That's debatable.
It isn't. But I see what you're getting at. This island resembles the one on the show. Only there aren't any mountains here. And the plants seem like they're on fucking steroids.
Landis saw what she meant. The vegetation didn't just flourish here. It raged with a hellish intensity. The massive junipers and palms looming like sleeping giants. The tangles of fern, acanthus, and ginger battling for sunlight beneath the thick canopy. The shoots of creeper and liana streaming this way and that, weaving an intricate web of leaf and vine amongst the droves of orchids, azaleas, and holly. So this isn't normal then? Landis said.
Wow,
Mary replied.
First ocean and first jungle?
First sunken ship, too.
Heck of a trip, huh?
Heck of a trip. Landis noticed movement to their right and saw that some of their fellow castaways had begun to congregate in the boulder-laden clearing they used for group assemblies. With the morning shelter-building project finished and their allotted break time over, it was on to the next task that Blanchard, the cruise ship's first officer and self-appointed leader here, had dreamed up. You a part of that? Landis inquired. Mary regarded the gathering castaways.
Possibly. You?
Depends. You know what Blanchard has in mind?
Not sure. Although I did hear Hadley and Stevens talking about taking a raft out to where the ship went down. Blanchard seems to like the idea.
Hadley and Stevens were the ship's staff officer and chief engineer. Landis scowled. Really? Why?
From what I heard, they want to see if someone can swim down to the wreckage and recover some things. Stevens seems to think he can do it.
That's crazy. They won't even know where to look. No one knows how far out we were, and even if they did, the ship is gone. Bottom of the ocean. Brad may seem a bit fishy. Those bug eyes. What do you think, Graves' disease? But I didn't see any gills on his fucking neck. Mary batted his arm playfully.
You're awful. There's a scuba kid on one of the lifeboats.
Even so, I just think we're better off concentrating on the food situation instead of silly errands like that. It was no secret that food supplies were running low, and their fishing efforts had proved negligible. If we're here a couple more days, people are going to start getting real hungry real fast.
I think everyone understands that. Hopefully we won't be here that long. Someone had to have heard Blanchard's sat phone plea.
The first of the 3 explosions that eventually sunk the ship had occurred in the communications room, taking away the crew's ability to initiate a traditional mayday. Blanchard fortunately had the presence of mind amid the ensuing chaos to grab a sat phone on his way to the bridge crew's lifeboat. That's the hope. It would have been nice if he hadn't dropped the stupid thing in the water before getting a response, but that's the universe for you.
Indeed it is. I know he feels rotten about it, just as he feels rotten about you.
Landis peered at her. Me?
All I know is he's mentioned you several times in the last few days, saying he doesn't get why you don't want to be a part of the team. It really seems to bug him.
Grumbling to himself, Landis edged his way to the bottom of the dune and walked back out to where the dry and wet sand converged. After the ship had gone kablooey and they all ended up on the island, Blanchard and his boys had rapidly established a pecking order among the ship's survivors, with the boat's officers at the top, the ship workers at second tier, and the 100-plus passengers at the bottom. Landis thought it made sense and was happy being a worker bee. Blanchard, however, had other designs, and repeatedly tried to draft him into the upper echelon. When Landis resisted, Blanchard upped the pressure, going to the point of insulting him in front of the others for not being a team player.
Hey,
Mary said, catching up to Landis.
did I say something wrong?
Landis watched as the ebb and tide slid up the shore and lapped at his toes. No. It's just they keep pestering me about it, and I wish they'd fucking stop. They're doing fine without my services. Why Blanchard even cares is beyond me.
Is it?
Huh?
Come on, Brendan.
Mary said.
Everyone knows you saved his life the night the ship went down. His life and the whole damn bridge crew's lives. That's why he cares.
Landis let out an irritated huff and ran a hand through his thick swath of black hair. She was right, of course. When the bridge crew's lifeboat came apart during the third explosion, Landis had jumped in the water and rescued the 3 officers who had survived the impact. It should have been 4 officers, but the blast had incinerated the poor captain. Taking Landis's silence as quiet acquiescence, Mary removed her white blouse and jean shorts and dropped them in the dry sand. Underneath, she had on a stunning light blue bikini that revealed a taut runner's body.
You know,
She said, heading for the water.
I think I'll go for that dip now.
So, not attending that gathering then?
They don't need me.
So saying, Mary slipped beneath the water's surface. 15 long seconds later, she came up for air and gave him a thumbs up. Returning the gesture, Landis backed up a few paces and sat down in the warm, dry sand. As he watched Mary frolic about in the sparkling blue waters, it occurred to him that he genuinely liked the woman, more than he had liked anyone in a long time. And, unless he completely misread the situation, it seemed she genuinely liked him too. Interested to see where things went from here, Landis hooked his fingers behind his head and lay back, resting his head on a natural sand pillow. Before long, his eyes drooped shut, and the sound of waves sloshing carried him off to sleep.
Brendan, wake up!
Landis opened his eyes to find Mary standing over him, kicking his foot.
Get up, sleepyhead. Something's happened.
What? He murmured. He had been dreaming of the night the ship had gone down, of the explosions, the chaos, the crazy ordeal in the water, and frenzied images still echoed in his mind. What's the matter?
The party Blanchard sent out earlier is back.
So?
Apparently they found some food. I'm going to see what's up. You should come too.
Landis rubbed his face. Fuck. All right. Mary grabbed his hand, helped him up, and stalked off towards the group. Reluctantly, Landis straggled after her, his eyes locked on her wet, shifting buttocks. So nice to have you back, Brendan, Blanchard said as Landis and Mary joined the other survivors. All done staring at the pretty ocean, are we? Maybe, Landis fired back. You all done being a dickwad? Groans and chuckles issued from the others in equal measure. Blanchard was a tall, hefty man with a large, bald head. Even without an officious uniform on to draw one's attention, he was a beacon in a crowd. He peered disapprovingly at Landis, then glanced at Stevens, who had led the team sent to explore the far side of the island. Stevens has an announcement, he said to everyone. Stevens, a skinnier Steve Buscemi type, de-shouldered the backpack he was carrying and unzipped it.
All right. So about half a mile in, we came across an acre's worth of trees with what looks like papaya growing on them.
He removed the 3 green-yellow orbs from the bag and set them on the ground. Anyone tried them? Blanchard asked.
Hey, all 4 of us.
Lou Moncrief replied. Lou worked as a bartender at the ship's ocean bar. Landis had met him the first night out. Seemed like a good enough guy.
And we're all fine.
The 2 others from the recon team nodded. Landis didn't know them by name. All right, change of plans, Blanchard announced. We'll skip getting the wreckage site for now and take about 20 people back into the jungle to collect as much of the fruit as we can. Any volunteers? Many hands went up, including Mary's. Blanchard selected 17 of them, plus Mary. What do you say? He asked Landis. Mary arched her eyebrows invitingly. Sure, Landis said. Happy to help. Wonderful, Blanchard replied. He indicated the large pile of luggage gathered under one of the shelters they had built earlier. If you please, grab a bag or two each and we'll get to it. The volunteers migrated to the shelter and retrieved their bags. Blanchard, Stevens, and Hadley did the same. Morgan, the hotel manager, joined them. Mary selected a military duffel bag from the heap.
Think of it as an adventure,
she told Landis.
Pretend we're on Lost.
Landis grabbed the blue suitcase and matching garment bag. All right, he said. I can be Jack and you can be Kate. He looked around. But who's Locke and who's Ben?
Blanchard would be Locke for sure. Morgan would be Ben,
she whispered.
I know he's black, but with those glasses he's a dead ringer.
Landis laughed because she was spot on.
And let's go with you being Sawyer instead of Jack. I mean, you've got Jack-like looks and everything, but you're more the Sawyer type.
She slung the duffel bag over her shoulder and headed for the others, who were already heading into the jungle. Landis grinned after her. Most of the women he knew who had watched the show found the Sawyer character sexy as hell, which he thought boded well for him. They were a quarter mile in when they came across the first patch of blackened trees.
What the hell is this?
Said Dennis Mannon, one of the ship's musicians and owner of the biggest afro Landis had ever seen on a white dude. Stevens approached a tree and gestured towards the ring of sooty undergrowth that lay beneath them.
Yeah, we saw a bunch of this earlier. It's all over the place. Fires ignited by lightning strikes, my guess. Bound to happen out here.
Blanchard looked mildly displeased that Stevens hadn't mentioned this before. He stood next to the far skinnier man and examined the charred vegetation. Burns look fresh, except... He pointed at a series of new branches growing from the trees and the shoots of vines scaling the blackened husks. If the burns was fresh, I doubt those vines would be growing all over them. Not yet, at least. Stevens shrugged.
Storms a lot out here. Plants grow quick when they have plenty of water. Y'all should see my lawn back in Savannah after it rains a couple days.
Blanchard scrutinized the fresh growth. I suppose. Awesome, Morgan declared, kicking at the charred log. Mr. Saw, now can we get on with it?
What's the rush, sir?
Nick Hadley said.
Got you a hot date or something?
Hadley was the youngest of the hotel stewards and conducted himself as if he had been plucked straight out of the 40s, with his side-parted hair and Bogart-esque mannerisms. No, young fella, Morgan said. Getting hungry is all. A few of the others said they were getting hungry as well, and Blanchard proposed they move on. As they trundled through the underbrush, Landis noted that they were actually walking over a thick layer of soot. The bottoms of his sneakers were caked with the stuff. He made a comment about it, which Stevens dismissed as expected given the number of storms and lightning strikes the island likely took. The look on Blanchard's face suggested he thought Stevens was full of shit. When they got to the grove, an area markedly different from the palms, bamboos, and junipers filling out the rest of the jungle, Stevens raised his arms exultantly towards the tops of the new trees.
Here we are. Beautiful, aren't they? Magnificent,
Lou Moncrief agreed. The other two from the original party murmured their assent. A bare-chested volunteer who sported a head full of sandy dreads edged in for a closer look.
Yo, I ain't so sure this shit is papaya. Papayas are smaller and softer.
What is it then? Blanchard asked.
A cousin of the papaya maybe,
Dread Guy said.
You know, it's funny finding it here in the first place. Papaya is native to the Americas, not Africa or Europe. We were headed for the Mediterranean, yo, so I'm betting we're somewhere near northern Africa. I wonder what it's doing here.
Doesn't really matter much in our situation, Blanchard replied, as long as it's edible.
He turned to Stevens. So, there's about an acre of this fruit?
Give or take,
said Stevens.
We walked around it before. Didn't really walk through it, though.
Blanchard's large brow furrowed. Why not? Stevens pointed at the trees.
Guess we were too focused on getting some of it down.
Blanchard looked at Morgan. Mike, do me a favor. Take Brendan and Mrs. Simmons here and check the rest of this out. Bring her duffel bag in case you find anything else. We'll fill up the rest of the bags you brought. Morgan nodded.
You bet. But first...
He picked up a felled fruit and hurled it at one of the clusters in the canopy above. The fruit struck home, knocking 3 of its brethren loose. Morgan grabbed one, pulled out a Swiss Army knife from his pocket, and signaled for Landis and Mary to follow him. As they disappeared into the papaya grove, Landis heard Blanchard ask Stevens what the hell was wrong with them. Stevens claimed he didn't know what Blanchard meant, adding that he felt great. He was just a little hungry was all, like everyone else. Landis and Mary chatted quietly as they traipsed along after Morgan. Morgan, meanwhile, wandered ahead, seemingly more concerned with nibbling his fruit than whether or not they were keeping up. He did, however, offer them a taste at one point, but both Landis and Mary declined. Landis's stomach hadn't been right since the ship had sunk, and Mary just wasn't hungry.
Suit yourselves.
Minutes onward, he strayed out of sight. Mary and Landis hurried to catch up. They found him at a dead stop, standing at the edge of a large depression in the jungle floor. The depression, more of a crater in Landis's opinion, looked to be about 100 feet wide and 20 feet deep. It was filled with a latticework of leaf and vine, beneath which lay a bunch of white sticks and shell fragments. Landis drew up to the pit's edge, knelt and studied its contents. Mary went down on her haunches beside him. "Wait," Landis said.
Are those... Fuck me sideways, they are,
Mary confirmed. Morgan adjusted his glasses and surveyed the mounds of remains. Skulls, rib cages, femurs, pelvises.
I'm no anthropologist, but those look human to me.
The sentiment hung in the air, and the 3 of them gawked in stunned silence. At last Morgan spoke up, instructing Landis to go get Blanchard.
Just him, nobody else. And be cool about it here. Right now, go.
Landis turned and ran back the way they had come. He returned 10 minutes later with a sweaty, stone-faced Blanchard in tow. As they came upon the pit, Blanchard demanded to know what was going on. Morgan said nothing, just pointed. Blanchard stared into the pit for a full minute, taking it all in.
Jesus, Harold Christ. There's got to be at least, 100 of them? 200? Where'd they all come from?
An old slave ship?
Ventured Mary.
Or pirates,
Morgan said.
I feel mighty silly saying it, but it's possible that pirates from the olden days used this place as a dumping ground for their victims. Wouldn't pirates just dump their victims at sea?
Landis said. Blanchard knelt at the pit's edge.
I don't see any clothes.
Yeah,
Morgan said.
Mary and I noticed that too. It's bizarre.
That,
Mary added.
And it appears that some of the bones are way older than the others.
She pointed to a cluster at the pit center, which seemed more weathered than the ones near the edge.
Like those? Is it me, or do they look new?
Blanchard was inclined to agree.
Could it be different groups of people?
Landis queried, not liking the implications. Blanchard stood up, closed his eyes, and began massaging the lids.
All right, listen up. I mean really listen.
He opened his eyes.
As bizarre as this is, and I grant you it's fucking bizarre, it cannot be our priority right now. When rescue comes, sure, but until that time, we have bigger fish to fry. Namely, getting everyone fed, which means we're the only 4 that knows about this. Understood?
Morgan nodded. Landis and Mary exchanged a dubious look, but also nodded their concurrence.
Good,
Blanchard said.
And thank you. Now, let's get back and help round up some more fruit before someone comes looking.
Landis pondered the jungle around them. There was still much of it they hadn't searched yet.
He asked Blanchard if he and Mary could continue with their reconnaissance, pointing out there might be different fruit nearby, and they'd never know if they didn't look. Blanchard was reluctant, especially with what they had just found, but Landis pressed him.
I've hunted and camped with my dad since I was a little kid. This is nothing.
Blanchard sighed and glanced at his watch. Fine. Just meet us back here at the beach in an hour. No longer. Mary gave him a mock salute.
You got it, boss.
Blanchard turned, and he and Morgan started back towards the others. An hour, he said, disappearing into the lush greenery. Halfway into their allotted time, Landis and Mary came upon a small clearing in the papaya grove and opted to take a short break there.
Man, I thought for sure we'd find something cool out here,
Landis said, taking a seat on a fallen juniper.
But nothing.
A freshwater spring would have been nice,
Mary said.
The water rations from the lifeboats are nearly gone.
Landis licked his dry lips.
Amen to that, lady. It's a problem.
He looked at her and smiled.
What?
Nothing. It's just that you were right. This is like an adventure.
Mary responded with a sultry grin and approached him. While she'd put her Daisy Dukes back on prior to setting out with the group, she'd left her blouse back at the beach.
Coming to see the light, are we?
She said, drawing close. Landis remained still. His Cornhusker shorts suddenly became uncomfortable in the front.
I take it you wanted to get me alone for some reason?
She went on. Landis's mind went in 1,000 directions.
Perhaps.
Mary gently straddled him, pressing her body hard against his.
Well, somebody's excited down there.
To be honest, I've been imagining this for days.
Me too.
They leered at each other then and let their instincts take over. By Landis's watch, they had made it back to the beach in a hair over Blanchard's hour. Both were giddy about what had just happened, but took care to act normal when they emerged from the jungle. They found Stevens and Hadley sitting amongst a large group of passengers and ship workers, telling jokes and eating the gathered fruit. Everyone seemed happy and festive. Not seeing Blanchard, Landis waved at Stevens and got his attention.
Brendan,
the skinny man said.
You made it back. Anything else out there to report? Nada,
Landis said.
Ah, well, worth a shot.
Stevenson's gaze lingered on Landis a few seconds longer than it should have, making Landis wonder if the man was gay. Not that he cared. It was just a damned unusual look.
Blanchard around?
Mary asked. Stevens pointed at the shore where another large group of passengers and ship workers were milling about.
Radjic, one of the performers, made a big fuss while we were away about seeing a ship. The big guy's over there looking for it. No one else saw anything. My guess is the Czech imagined it.
Thanks, Landis said.
No prob. Have any papaya yet?
Not yet, but I will.
Good. You really should. It's incredible.
Stevens peered down at a stack of the untouched fruit on the ground and seemed to forget all about Landis. Landis laced his fingers in Mary's, which surprised and delighted her, and they wandered towards the shore. They found Blanchard standing with his feet in the water and his focus on the distant horizon. Morgan stood next to him, munching on the yellow-green fruit.
See anything, Dave?
Landis queried, letting go of Mary's hand. Blanchard shrugged.
Doubt there's anything to see.
A few meters away, a shirtless man with dark hair and a goatee kicked angrily at the water.
I saw, I tell you,
he shouted.
I know ship, and this was ship.
Blanchard inhaled and indicated the bonfire that raged about 80 yards down the beach, the signal fire they had erected shortly after washing ashore.
Nikolai, I don't know what you saw. A ship in the area would have seen the smoke from our fire, and would have come to investigate. Screw you, not captain,
Radjic said.
I know what I see.
Blanchard waved a dismissive hand at the performer and faced Landis, who preempted any questions by saying they hadn't found anything else. Blanchard looked relieved. He gave Landis a thumbs up and headed back toward Stevens' group.
Getting hungry again. Gonna have some more fruit.
Morgan remained where he was, eyes on the sea, papaya juice oozing down his chin. Landis and Mary joined hands once more, and Landis led her back to his favorite dune. Remounting it, they peered out at the vast glittering ocean. The waves kept rolling in from infinity, approaching and receding, approaching and receding. Slish, slosh, slish, slosh.
Okay, if we just chill for a bit and watch to see if maybe that Nikolai guy is right. Part of me hopes he is, and part of me hopes he isn't.
Sure, Landis said, knowing what she meant. He put his arm around her, and together they contemplated the island's various mysteries. Day gave way to evening, and no ship came. When it got dark, most of the 100-plus survivors migrated to the makeshift shelters they'd finished building earlier. Some gathered under the tent-like canopies, while others broke into smaller clusters and erected campfires to huddle around. Here and there, papayas were eaten. Landis and Mary joined a cluster that included Lou Moncrief, two newlywed couples, the Elkies and the Joneses, the ship's entire dance crew, and a couple of chefs. The conversation was mostly light, with topics ranging from what life was like working on a cruise ship to expectations for the upcoming election. It drifted into serious territory when Moncrief brought up the amount of people who had died in the ship's explosions, but soon enough gravitated back to lighter fare. Eventually, Landis and Mary said their goodnights and wandered back to their dune, where they snuggled close, fooled around some, and talked about how ridiculous things had turned out. Sunken cruise ship, deserted island, odd skeleton pit, heated little romance. It was the stuff of corny novels, a tale no one would believe in 20 years. Above, 1,000,000 stars shone bright in the onyx sky. "Hey, Mary," Landis whispered as they gazed up at them.
Yes, Brendan?
I'm glad random chance put us on the same cruise ship.
Crazily enough, I'm glad too.
He kissed her on the lips, and together they drifted off to sleep. They woke to the sound of a man shouting. It was Nikolai Radjic. He was on the shore again, pointing at the horizon.
"I tell you! See?"
Landis and Mary sat up in unison. Dozens of others had already wandered to the beach to see what the ruckus was about. They all had their eyes on the object that had Radjic in a frenzy. A large gray ship idling half a mile from shore. Soon everyone was on the beach, gawking at the vessel. Radjic sought Blanchard out and clapped in the big man's face.
"See?"
he said.
"Is a ship."
Blanchard, who was actually stripped down to his tighty-whities, with his paunch hanging over the brief's waistband, put his hands on his wide hips and frowned.
"Can you tell what it is?"
he said. "No flag. Portuguese, maybe." He let out a strange laugh.
"But see those giant barrels jutting from the starboard side? I think it's a warship."
Landis squinted and saw that he was right.
"Must have been the first to respond to the distress call,"
Blanchard added. He laughed again and scratched at his chest, which was already reddened from the previous scratching.
"I wonder if they've got any food."
Landis glanced around at the crowd and discerned that 3/4 of the others were stripped down to their skivvies as well. Some were fully naked, their genitals out for everyone to see, but none of them seemed to care. In fact, the only ones who appeared to notice the widespread nudity were those like Landis and Mary, who still had the majority of their clothes on.
Why are they acting like we're at hedonism too?
Mary asked.
No idea,
Landis said. It dawned on him that all those who'd stripped down were also scratching at themselves as Blanchard was. They were twitching too, like an army of drug addicts going through withdrawal. Upon hearing Blanchard's mention of food, the unclothed scratchers grew restless, uselessly reaching out for the distant ship, beseeching it to bring them sustenance. A knot formed in Landis's stomach. This was bad. Mary approached one of the female dancers they had sat with the night before, Cheryl, a short-haired bony waif who wore only her panties. She reached out and touched the woman's back. It was hot.
My God, Cheryl, You're burning up.
The dancer giggled.
I could go for a burger right about now. A nice juicy Angus burger. You think they have burgers on that boat out there? I don't know, honey,
Mary said, looking at Landis.
Hopefully. 'Cause I could eat about 10 of them, I think. 10, 11, 12.
Landis went over to Blanchard and put his hand on the man's arm. It was radiating with fever heat. Not taking his eyes off the boat, Blanchard said, "Hey, buddy, you see the ship? You see it there? A ship came after all." He sounded high.
Yeah,
Landis said.
Pretty exciting.
Only if they had food. And why wouldn't they? Landis squeezed Blanchard's warm shoulder, then trotted back to the shore and motioned for Mary to come with him to the water, where they both rinsed their hands.
What are we doing?
Mary asked.
They're sick,
Landis said, keeping his voice down.
It looks serious. Come on.
Together they hurried over to where the shelter stood. Remnants of snacked-upon papayas were scattered everywhere.
Maybe it's the fruit,
Landis said. Mary deliberated what he was saying.
You think it's toxic?
Or infected with some sort of bug. In college, I studied microbiology as a minor and learned a little about bacteria, viruses, parasites, and fungi. That crap can get into just about anything, fruit included. Usually you see signs of the infection in the fruit, but not always.
So this is like a mega potent form of food poisoning or something?
Or something.
3 of the clothed non-scratchers spotted Landis and Mary and broke away from the beach. 2 men and a woman. Landis didn't know their names.
Hey, guys,
the first man said, jogging towards them. He was older with silver hair and a George Hamilton tan.
I think there might be a problem with the papaya.
The second man, who was much younger than the first, and who seemed betrothed to the woman with them, said,
People who ate it ain't acting right. Look, they're all naked. We didn't eat any,
the woman said.
Did you?
No,
Landis and Mary replied in unison. A loud collective cry of pain erupted then from the mouths of all the scratchers. When it stopped, every one of them collapsed to the sand. Left standing there were a dozen more fully clothed non-scratchers, others like them who Landis deduced had not touched the tainted fruit. Half of the dozen, out of confusion and fear, fled to where Landis's group stood. The other 6 began tending to the fallen, endeavoring to stir them. Landis ran over to see if he could help.
They breathing?
He asked one of those who had stayed, a man recognized as one of the casino's card dealers.
Are their hearts beating?
Casino guy looked up at Landis.
Yes to both. They're hot as hell, but they seem okay, just unconscious. Dude, any idea what did this?
Landis relayed the bad fruit theory to him. The guy mulled it over and let out an empty laugh.
Huh. Of all the tropical islands in the ocean, we wash up on the one with the fucked up papaya.
And a pit full of human skeletons,
Landis said.
What?
Casino guy said. Landis filled them in on their grim discovery.
Good heavens! Where the fuck are we?
Wish I knew.
Landis transferred his gaze to the ominous ship. Though it was hard to tell from this distance, he believed he detected activity on deck. He wasn't sure if that was good or bad. A wet slapping sound brought his attention back to the beach. He saw that all the fallen bodies were now convulsing and flopping around like fish in the sand. White foam frothed from their mouths, and a low staccato keening noise emanated from their throats. Casino guy cried out in fright and jumped back. Landis retreated to the shelters and took Mary's hand. Casino guy and the 5 others who had been tending to the bodies followed suit. Questions abounded as to what to do, and the only thing any of them felt comfortable with was waiting and seeing. The convulsions went on for 2 or more minutes before abruptly stopping.
Should we go and see if they're okay?
Before anyone could answer, a number of the fallen sat up. The rest also moved, but in strange ways. Some rolled onto their bellies. Some lifted a leg or an arm, or both, as if experimenting with their use.
The ones who sat up started doing the same. Landis noted that all of them had their eyes open and that their expressions were either slack or twitchy. Ignoring the sheer bizarreness of this development, the red-haired woman bounded over to the spastic bodies. She knelt next to a teenage girl who had no clothes on. The girl was sitting up and staring blankly ahead. Red Hair asked her something and the girl's head jerked towards her. To Landis, the girl's eyes looked devoid of life. Contradicting this, the girl smiled at Red Hair, or rather, her lips peeled back, exposing her teeth. At the same time, one of her arms flailed up and its claw-like hand seized hold of Red Hair's locks. Red Hair asked the girl what she was doing. The girl responded by biting into Red Hair's face and pulling away a sizable chunk of her right cheek. Blood sprang from the wound and the poor woman screamed. Casino Guy was the first to react, sprinting over to Red Hair and attempting to pry the naked teen's arm away. The girl wouldn't let go, so he punched her in the face. The blow knocked the girl back, causing her to rip a large tuft from Red Hair's head. Red Hair screamed again. Casino Guy hauled the bleeding woman to her feet and hurried her back to the others. Landis removed the shirt and pressed it against her ruined face. Across the beach, the rest of the fallen started to rise. By degrees, they got onto their hands and knees before elevating onto shaky legs. Several stumbled and fell as they rose, but in time they all managed to stand. Once upright, they turned their sights on each other. An eerie moment followed where they all appeared to size each other up. Then pandemonium erupted. Everyone attacked everyone. It was like one of those massive WWE Royal Rumbles, except the violence was real. Biting seemed the most prevalent form of attack, with teeth tearing at flesh everywhere you looked. Blood spurted in rivers. Tanned older guys scurried into the jungle and signaled for the rest of the non-fruit eaters to join him. Landis believed it was the wisest move and ushered 26 of them into the trees.
Why the hell are they killing each other?
Mary asked frantically.
Whatever infected them turned them rabid,
Landis said. Red Hair released a loud moan.
My face! That fucking bitch!
Landis told her to hush, believing it crucial for them to stay off the fruit eater's radar. He passed this notion on to the others and they all concurred. None of them wanted to end up like Red Hair. Hidden within a thicket of palm leaves, they watched in horror as the fruit eaters went at each other like starved animals, inflicting gruesome wounds. Here and there, Landis saw a penis bitten off or a breast torn away, but it was the faces that seemed to take the worst punishment. After a few minutes, there wasn't a fruit eater out there that didn't have at least some portion of their countenance removed. Blanchard, who bore a myriad of red gashes, no longer had a nose or ears. Not that it fazed him at all. He was going through the other fruit eaters like a wrecking ball, plucking muscle and skin off passing bodies as if they were rotisserie chickens.
Why aren't any of them going down?
Tan Guy asked. It was a damn good question, thought Landis. The damage most of them had suffered was more than enough to put a normal person out of commission for months. Yet there they all stood, battered and bloodied, but still ticking like ghastly Energizer bunnies.
We got to get out of here,
Casino Guy said.
No fucking shit,
Landis said.
But where?
The lifeboats,
Tan Guy declared.
We could hop on a couple and head out to that ship.
Landis considered the suggestion. The 4 surviving lifeboats were anchored just offshore, beyond where the signal fire burned. They were secured by long ropes tying them to trees in the jungle. He imagined it wouldn't be too hard to swim out to them, get them started. After that, he wasn't so sure motoring out to the warship was the best plan. The fact it hadn't moved any closer troubled him. Landis communicated this to the others.
Who cares?
The Tan Guy said.
Look, I get it's a mean-looking boat with guns and shit, but so what? It's not like they're going to shoot a bunch of tourists.
A number of the others murmured in agreement.
Okay,
Landis said, wholly unsure that being a tourist offered them any sort of armor.
it's the best we got. Let's do it then.
They crept through the jungle, making as little noise as possible. Red Hair kept Landis's shirt pressed to her face and stuffed a clump of it into her mouth to muffle her cries. When they reached the signal fire, they discussed who would get on what boat and who would drive. There'd be one group of 12, one group of 13. Both groups would swim out at the same time in case their presence drew the fruit eaters.
Ready, everyone?
Tangai said. They all nodded. He counted to 3 and they went. The fruit eaters immediately took notice and came shambling up the shoreline. Their movements were stiff and they seemed unaware of how to run. Landis's group had already made it to their lifeboat by the time the bloody horde reached the signal fire. Curiously, none of the fruit eaters pursued them into the water. They just stood on the shore staring, a collective bloody mess, littered with oozing wounds, open fractures, and mutilated flesh. Some were still chewing on things.
They're just standing there.
Fine with me,
Landis replied. Tangai led the other group. His 12 boarded their boat faster than Landis's people and quickly got their engine running. Landis told them to go on ahead. They'd be along in a minute. Tangai concurred and set off towards the warship. A scraggly bearded guy named Ellis volunteered to run Landis's boat. It took a few tries, but the old-timer finally got the motor to kick on. As he backed the boat up to turn it, Mary went to the starboard side and watched Tangai's lifeboat. It was already a quarter of the way to the warship. Landis watched with her. After a few seconds, he tensed up and grabbed her arm.
Christ, Mary, look at the ship.
One of the vessel's turrets rotated toward Tangai's lifeboat and leveled off its 2 large barrels. A heartbeat later, and Tangai's lifeboat exploded into 1,000,000 pieces. Ellis cursed and banked their boat hard left.
They killed them!
Mary yelled. Landis saw that the smoking turret was changing direction, aiming for their boat. He yelled for Ellis to go as fast as they could.
Yeah, what the fuck do you think I'm doing?
Ellis yelled back. The guns fixed on them. Landis's heart froze. He wondered if being blown apart would hurt. Seconds passed, then a few more, but no whump came.
What are they waiting for?
Red Hair murmured, pus dribbling down her chin. As if in reply, the sound of propellers roared above them. Landis looked up and saw what looked like a small military transport plane flying overhead. He darted to the port side of the lifeboat and tracked the aircraft as it hurtled off into the distance, then curled back toward the island. When it reached the island, its cargo bay door opened, and a gel-like liquid poured from the opening, raining down on the jungle. It was a nasty-smelling substance, its petrol odor powerful enough to burn Landis's nostrils. Once the transport plane finished dumping its payload, it veered off to the east. It did not make another pass. Landis's boat had somehow reached the nearest end of the island. It appeared they had diverted blowing up long enough to escape. As Landis thought this, however, he heard another loud thwomp. He had expected to feel the force of a mighty blast, but instead a tall arc of fire leapt up from the center of the jungle, and the island's core burst into flames. Landis peered at the beach and saw that the fruit eaters were shambling along the shoreline after his boat, their bodies ablaze.
The ship people knew about the fruit,
Landis muttered. Mary clung to his arm.
Are we going to end up like the others?
Landis glanced back at the warship. Its turret had not followed them.
I don't know.
Mary nuzzled in close and wept. Landis wept with her. Behind them, Red Hair collapsed to the floor and started convulsing. The captain of the Moroccan destroyer stood within the ship's conning tower. his binoculars trained on the escaping lifeboat. He felt terrible for the people aboard. He hated what he had already done to their companions and what he was further compelled to do to them. They knew it was bacteria-based, what festered inside the fruit, and that the fruit looked and tasted like papaya, but technically wasn't. They also knew the trees upon which the fruit grew were resilient beyond comprehension. No matter what chemical they used, it always grew back. What they didn't know, because it was strict policy not to remove any samples from the island, was how to treat against the infection once it entered a host. It was the captain's charge to make sure they never had to find out. It was also his charge to make sure the rest of the world remained oblivious to its existence. Since the late 1600s, when the island was first discovered, it had been upon an Alawite descendant's shoulders to keep the place a secret. Thus far, every one of them had succeeded. The captain had no intention of being the first to fail. After a moment of contemplation, he lowered his binoculars and nodded to his executive officer. The executive lifted his handheld communicator and gave the order: "Send a team. No survivors." The amphibious raft sped away from the warship and rounded the end of the island in pursuit of Landis's lifeboat. The team manning the raft spotted the lifeboat immediately. It sat not even 100 meters offshore, and it was barely moving, as if the engine had stalled. The officer leading the strike team directed the navigator to make the standard approach, 30 meters from the stern, all weapons hot. The navigator positioned the raft as instructed. The officer surveyed the boat but saw no sign of the passengers. Assuming they were hiding on the floor, he commanded his team to open fire. The team first riddled the lifeboat with small arms fire, then pummeled it with the grenade launchers. When they were done, very little remained of the boat. The strike team maintained their position for several minutes after the last bits of the lifeboat vanished beneath the surface. Satisfied no one had survived, the lead officer signaled to the navigator to turn the raft around and to return to their ship. Before the navigator could act, however, a woman-like creature with red hair sprang up from the water and crawled onto the raft. Its mouth latched onto one of the men's legs. The officer pulled out his .45 and shot the creature in the neck. The bullet had no effect. The creature lunged at a different man and caught his arm in its mouth. The officer fired again. The 12 from Landis's boat lay close to the shore with their bodies immersed in ocean and their heads barely poking out of the water. It had been Landis's idea to abandon the boat and swim back to the island once they were out of sight, hoping the boat would work as a decoy. An idea made easier once Red Hair turned rabid and attacked their group. It seemed the infection propagated at a highly accelerated rate if transmitted via a bite. Casino Guy got it worst. She had eaten his face and voice box and left him there to suffer in silent agony. From their half-hidden positions, they watched in horror as the strike team unleashed its assault on their lifeboat. As the vessel came apart at the seams, Landis looked at Mary and told her he was happy they got to enjoy their little adventure together.
"It's more than some people get,"
Mary said, and kissed him with her bloodied lips. When they looked at the sea again, the people on the amphibious raft were being attacked by something that had emerged from the water. Shots rang out. Screams traveled through the air. Landis wondered what had happened, but soon realized Red Hair must have made it to the raft. The vindictive part of him was glad.
"Do you think whoever bombed the cruise ship knew about this place?"
Mary asked.
"Do you think they wanted to expose it to the world?"
"Or expose the world to it," Landis said darkly.
"Motherfuck!"
Ellis exclaimed, peering to their left.
"What?"
Landis asked. The sound had barely registered when the amphibious raft exploded. Landis turned his head and saw the warship rounding the south end of the island. It was much closer now. He could see people standing on the deck holding binoculars, some pointed at the exploded raft, others at their group. Their not-so-well-hidden group, he thought. He saw the turret with the barrels take aim at them too. He looked at his left hand, which was missing the pinky and ring finger. He could already feel the microbes going to work on him. He was already itchy and craving meat. Lots and lots of meat. "It's for the best, Mary," he said, understanding the warship's purpose. "It's for the..."
Chilling tales for dark nights.